Did you even read the dress code? My younger sister sneered on her very first day as executive vice president, throwing the heavy employee handbook directly at my chest. You are fired. Moments later, in that same marble lobby, the $3 billion investor we had been courting for months wrapped me in a massive hug. Ready to sign the merger, he asked. I smiled, glancing at my sister, whose jaw was practically on the floor. Afraid not, I told him. She just fired me, so the deal is off. He slowly turned to her, his eyes icy. You did what? My name is Kendra, and I am 35 years old. For the past decade, I have been the invisible backbone of my father's financial acquisitions firm. While he paraded my younger sister around like the ultimate trophy of black excellence, I was the one pulling all-nighters to keep the company from going under. If you have ever been treated like the family scapegoat while carrying the weight of everyone else's success on your shoulders, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe, because you are going to want to hear exactly how I let my golden child sister burn her own kingdom to the ground in under 5 minutes. The morning it all fell apart started with the crisp, echoing click of my heels against the imported Italian marble floor of Vanguard Financial. I was reviewing the final valuation models on my tablet, feeling a rare surge of genuine pride. For this specific occasion, I was wearing a custom-tailored emerald green suit. I bought it to celebrate the biggest day of my career. Today was the day we were closing the Sterling deal, a $3 billion merger I had orchestrated entirely on my own. For years, I had worn the mandatory muted navy and gray tones my father strictly enforced, keeping my head down and blending into the corporate background. But today, I wanted to stand out. Today, I was stepping into the light. Then out of nowhere, a thick leather-bound book slammed hard into my chest. I stumbled backward from the sudden impact, dropping my tablet. The device clattered loudly against the stone floor, the screen cracking down the middle. I caught my breath and looked up to see Jada, my 28-year-old sister, standing there with her hands planted firmly on her hips. She was wearing a rigid navy blue pantsuit, her hair pulled back into a severe bun that looked painfully tight. Around us, the bustling morning activity of the lobby ground to a halt. Junior analysts, receptionists, and passing executives froze in their tracks, their eyes darting nervously between the two of us. What exactly are you wearing? Kendra, Jada demanded, her voice deliberately loud, bouncing off the high glass ceilings for maximum public exposure. You look like you are going to a nightclub, not a boardroom. This is a respectable financial institution. Did you completely forget the corporate handbook, or do you just lack basic professional decency? I stared at her, taking a slow, steady breath to keep my heart rate under control. The heavy book she had thrown at me was the company policy manual. Jada, I said, keeping my voice low and measured. I have been up all night finalizing the Sterling merger documents. This suit is perfectly professional, and we have a major signing in less than an hour. Professional for who? Jada laughed, a sharp, condescending sound that instantly transported me back to our childhood dinner table. Professional for a state school graduate, maybe. But here in the real world, we have standards. Dad has spent his entire life building Vanguard Financial to represent the absolute pinnacle of black wealth, sophistication, and excellence. We do not do loud colors. We do not do flashy ghetto aesthetics. We conform to the expectations of our top-tier clientele. But I suppose you would not understand that, since Dad only gave you a job in the back office out of pity. Her words were designed to strip away my dignity in front of the entire firm. That was Jada's signature move. She had just graduated with her MBA from an Ivy League university, a staggeringly expensive degree that our father Elijah had completely paid for without a second thought. Just last month, he had thrown a lavish catered gala to celebrate her graduation, bragging to every wealthy contact, politician, and socialite in his network about his brilliant, beautiful youngest daughter. He called her the future of the company. Meanwhile, my path had been entirely different. When I was 18, my father told me he would not waste his money sending a mediocre student to an expensive college. So I put myself through a state university. I worked 2 grueling jobs between classes, paid my own tuition, and spent my nights teaching myself advanced financial modeling and coding. For the past 10 years, I had been the one finding the undervalued companies building complex risk assessment algorithms from scratch and executing the quiet, highly profitable plays that kept Vanguard Financial afloat during economic downturns. My father never bragged about me. He kept me hidden in the analytics department, happily utilizing my brains and my late nights while keeping my name off the executive letterhead. My career simply did not fit his pristine country club narrative. I was the workhorse, Jada was the show pony, and now the show pony was trying to trample me. Jada took a step closer, invading my personal space. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at my face, her eyes narrowing with malicious delight. "You are an absolute embarrassment, Kendra. Dad just promoted me to executive vice president this morning. This is my firm to run now. I am in charge. And my very first order of business is cleaning up the dead weight and fixing our corporate image." I looked down at the employee handbook lying on the floor between my emerald green heels, right next to my shattered tablet. I did not raise my voice. I did not try to explain that without my proprietary algorithms, the company would have posted a massive catastrophic loss last quarter. I did not tell her that Julian Sterling, the notoriously ruthless titan of the tech industry, was only doing business with this firm because of the personal relationship, extensive data analysis, and unwavering trust I had built with him over the last 8 months. Sterling did not care about Vanguard Financial, he cared about my math. Instead of arguing, I calmly bent down my knees, popping slightly in the quiet lobby, and picked up the heavy book. I dusted off the cover, stood back up to my full height, and looked my younger sister dead in the eyes. I kept my voice perfectly level, employing the kind of quiet, absolute stillness that commands a room far better than hysterical shouting ever could. "Are you officially terminating my employment, Jada?" I asked. Jada scoffed, clearly emboldened by the audience of silent, wide-eyed employees gathered near the security turnstiles. She crossed her arms, a smug, triumphant smirk playing on her lips. "Yes, Kendra, I am." For blatant insubordination, repeated disregard for company policy, and cultural misalignment with our brand. "You are fired. Pack up your desk and get out of my building before I have security physically escort you out." The absolute arrogance radiating from her was suffocating. She truly believed her freshly printed Ivy League degree made her untouchable. She genuinely believed that because our father handed her an executive title on a silver platter, she possessed the actual power, intellect, and knowledge to run a multi-million-dollar firm. She had absolutely no idea what was actually holding the walls of this company together. She did not know she was standing on a house of cards that I had been balancing for a decade. I did not argue. I did not plead for my job or rush to our father's top-floor corner office to beg for his intervention. I simply smiled. It was a small, genuine smile of profound relief. For 10 years, I had been chained to this desk by a misplaced sense of loyalty to a family that viewed me as a convenient, disposable tool. Jada had just handed me the key to my own cage, and she had no idea what she had just unlocked. I reached up to my lapel, unclipped my corporate security badge, and let it fall from my fingers. It landed directly in the chrome trash can beside the reception desk with a satisfying, echoing thud. "I accept your terms, Executive Vice President," I said smoothly. Just as the words left my mouth, the heavy glass doors of the main lobby slid open with a soft mechanical hiss. A fleet of black SUVs had pulled up to the curb outside. The morning light caught the sharp, impeccably tailored silhouette of Julian Sterling as he strode into the lobby, flanked by his intimidating legal team and executive assistants. He carried the heavy, undeniable weight of $3 billion with every step he took, and he was walking right toward me. Julian Sterling moved with the kind of effortless authority that only comes from managing billions of dollars. His charcoal suit was immaculate. His legal team moved in tight formation behind him, a phalanx of briefcases and unreadable expressions. The sheer gravity of his presence sucked the air right out of the lobby. Everyone knew who he was. Vanguard Financial had been bleeding clients for 3 quarters, and Sterling's tech merger was the massive influx of capital my father needed to keep the doors open. He was our lifeline. Jada saw him, and her entire posture shifted. The vicious, snarling sister who had just fired me vanished in a fraction of a second. In her place stood the polished, painfully eager corporate heiress. She aggressively stepped forward, intentionally driving her shoulder into my arm to shove me out of the way. She smoothed her navy suit, plastered on a blindingly fake smile, and marched right into Sterling's path, cutting off his approach. "Mr. Sterling," Jada announced, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "It is an absolute honor to finally meet you. I am Jada Vanguard, the new Executive Vice President. My father, Elijah, has officially placed me in charge of overseeing your account. I have already prepared the executive boardroom for our signing, and I am fully briefed to manage your transition into our portfolio." She thrust her perfectly manicured hand forward, waiting for him to take it. She expected him to look at her the way our father did, with immediate, unquestioning admiration. She expected the Vanguard name to command immediate submission. Julian Sterling did not take her hand. He did not even slow his stride. He looked at Jada's outstretched hand, as if she had just offered him a dead fish. His gaze traveled up to her face, absolutely blank and completely devoid of interest. "Excuse me," Sterling said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that echoed off the marble walls. "Who exactly are you?" Jada's smile faltered for a microsecond. A flush of pink crept up her neck. She clearly was not used to being dismissed. "I am Jada Vanguard, the Executive Vice President. I will be your lead strategist moving forward." Sterling let out a short, humorless breath. He stepped entirely around her, treating her like a decorative pillar that had been placed in his way. His eyes scanned the lobby until they landed on me, standing near the security turnstiles, my emerald green suit standing out brightly against the sea of corporate gray. His stern face instantly broke into a massive, genuine smile. He bypassed my sister completely, walked straight up to me, and wrapped me in a warm, familiar hug. "Kendra," he boomed, pulling back and clapping his hands together. "It is good to see you. My legal team went over the final adjustments you made to the risk models at 2 in the morning. Brilliant work, as always. You caught that valuation discrepancy on the tech patents that my own guys missed. You saved me $20 million before we even signed a single piece of paper." I smiled warmly at him, feeling the collective shock of the entire lobby pressing down on us. "Thank you, Julian. I pride myself on attention to detail." "Well, your detail is the only reason we are doing this," Sterling said, adjusting his suit jacket. "I have my people ready. The funds are cleared in escrow. Are we ready to sign this merger and make some history today?" The silence in the lobby was deafening. I could hear Jada breathing heavily behind me, her absolute shock radiating off her like heat. She had no idea that I was the one who built the Sterling deal from the ground up. My father had likely told her the client was a lock, and that she just needed to smile and take the credit. That was the Vanguard way. Put Jada out front to collect the applause while I bled in the shadows to make the math work. I looked at Julian Sterling. Then I slowly turned my head to look at my sister. Jada was staring at me, her eyes wide, her face pale. The heavy employee handbook she had thrown at my chest moments prior was still lying on the floor between us. I turned my attention back to the billionaire standing in front of me. I let a slow, calm smile spread across my face. "Afraid not," I said, my voice perfectly clear and steady. "She just fired me. The deal is off." The words dropped like a physical weight into the room. Sterling froze. The warm, jovial energy evaporated from his body in an instant. He slowly turned his head to look at Jada. His blue eyes, which had been so friendly a moment ago, were now icy and terrifying. "You did what Sterling demanded," his voice dropping a dangerous octave. Jada flinched physically, stepping backward as Sterling's attention locked onto her. She opened her mouth, stammering, trying to find her corporate footing. "Mr. Sterling, you have to understand. Kendra is just a back-office analyst. She violated our corporate dress code and displayed gross insubordination. We maintain a very strict standard of excellence here at Vanguard Financial. As the new executive vice president, I assure you that I am more than capable of managing your merger. I have my MBA from Harvard. I can seamlessly take over her workload. Sterling looked at her with pure, unadulterated disgust. It was the look a lion gives a particularly annoying mouse. I do not care if you have a degree from Mars, Sterling said coldly. You do not have the slightest idea what is actually happening in this deal. Do you think I am bringing $3 billion of my personal capital to this mediocre firm? Because of your father's legacy, I am here for Kendra. Jada gasped, her mouth falling open. She looked around the lobby as if waiting for someone to jump in and defend her, but the staff remained frozen, watching the golden child self-destruct. Sterling took a step toward her, his voice echoing loudly for every employee to hear. Kendra's proprietary predictive algorithms are the only thing of value in this entire building. She spent the last 8 months personally structuring this merger to protect my assets. My contract specifically stipulated that my funds are managed exclusively by Kendra. Without her, your firm is nothing to me but a massive liability. He turned back to me, the anger smoothing out into a look of deep respect. Call my private line when you decide where you are going next, Kendra. My money follows you, not this circus. Sterling turned on his heel. Let us go, he commanded his team. The phalanx of lawyers turned in unison. In less than 30 seconds, the motorcade that was supposed to save my father's company was driving away, taking $3 billion with it. Jada stood frozen, her hands trembling by her sides. The color had completely drained from her face. She looked like she was going to be sick. The lobby remained in a state of absolute paralyzed silence. No one dared to move. No one dared to breathe. Then the sharp chime of the executive elevator broke the quiet. The brass doors slid open and my father, Elijah Vanguard, stepped out. He was dressed in a pristine gray suit, his gold watch catching the light. He strode out with his chest puffed out, fully expecting to greet the investor that would cement his legacy and save him from his mounting debts. Instead, he saw the empty driveway. He saw the security guards staring. He saw Jada shaking, and he saw me standing calmly by the exit, completely unbothered. Where is Julian Sterling? My father barked, his booming voice cutting through the tension. His eyes darted around the lobby. The front desk said his motorcade was here. Where did he go? Jada snapped out of her trance. The reality of what she had just done crashed down on her, and she immediately reverted to the only defense mechanism she knew. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger directly at my face and burst into theatrical, panicked tears. It is Kendra, Jada cried out, her voice echoing shrilly. She sabotaged us, Dad. She intentionally ruined the merger. She drove him away because she was jealous of my promotion. She is trying to destroy the company. My father did not ask for an explanation. He did not ask for my side of the story. He did not look at the security guards or the receptionist who had witnessed the entire exchange. He simply looked at me, his face twisting into a mask of pure, familiar rage. He had spent his entire life blaming me for everything that went wrong, acting as if my sole purpose on this earth was to absorb the consequences of his and Jada's incompetence. This was no different. Kendra, my father commanded, pointing aggressively toward the elevator. Get up to my office right now. You are going to get on the phone with Julian Sterling, you are going to apologize for whatever stunt you just pulled, and you are going to fix your mess. Do not test me today. Get upstairs. For 35 years, I would have lowered my head. I would have quietly stepped into the elevator, swallowed my pride, and spent the next 48 hours fixing the disaster they created just to keep the peace. But the peace was a lie. The loyalty was a trap. I looked at the man who had used me, hidden me, and underpaid me for a decade. Then I looked at the sister who had just fired me because she felt threatened by the color of my suit. I slowly turned my back on both of them. I walked over to the lobby elevator bank and pressed the down button for the parking garage. The doors slid open with a soft chime. Kendra! My father bellowed, stepping forward, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. Did you hear me? I said, get into my office and fix this. I stepped into the elevator and turned around to face him. I met his furious gaze with absolute chilling calm. I do not work here anymore, I said, my voice carrying perfectly across the marble floor. Fix it yourself. The heavy metal doors slid shut, cutting off his screaming, and leaving them both standing in the terrifying wreckage of their own making. My phone vibrated against the marble countertop for the 45th time in 2 hours. The screen flashed with my father's name, followed immediately by a barrage of frantic text messages from Jada. I did not bother reading a single one. Instead, I swiped the phone to silent and took a slow sip of my jasmine tea. The air in my penthouse was cool, quiet, and perfectly still. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the downtown skyline, a stark contrast to the windowless, cramped back office my father had confined me to for the last decade. He thought paying me a junior analyst salary kept me dependent on him. He had absolutely no idea that I had spent my nights and weekends building an independent consulting firm. This $3 million penthouse, the custom furniture, the artwork on the walls, it was all paid for by the very brilliance he refused to acknowledge. A sudden violent pounding on my front door shattered the silence. I glanced at the security monitor mounted on the wall. My father and Jada were standing in the hallway, both of them red-faced and breathing heavily. The intercom buzzed. It was Marcus, my building concierge, his voice tight with panic. He apologized profusely, explaining that the two guests had bypassed the front desk by screaming about a life-or-death family medical emergency. I pressed the release button, unlocking the heavy oak door. It flew open so hard it nearly hit the wall. Elijah marched inside his expensive Italian shoes, leaving scuff marks on my pristine hardwood floors. He did not pause to look around. He did not ask how I managed to afford a luxury penthouse overlooking the city. He did not even register the space. His tunnel vision was locked entirely on his own crisis. "Get your phone out right now," my father commanded, pointing a rigid finger at me. "You are going to call Julian Sterling's private line. You are going to tell him that your sudden departure was a temporary misunderstanding, a minor administrative glitch. You are going to beg him to bring his capital back to the table, and then you are coming back to the office to finalize the paperwork under your sister's supervision." I remained seated at my kitchen island, my hands resting lightly on my laptop keyboard. I did not reach for my phone. I did not break eye contact. "I am not calling anyone," I replied smoothly. "And I am certainly not returning to Vanguard Financial. Your executive vice president made her first executive decision today. She fired me. I am simply respecting her authority." Jada pushed past our father, her face twisted into a mask of pure, ugly entitlement. "Do not play games with us, Kendra. You set me up. You knew exactly what you were doing in that lobby. You deliberately embarrassed me in front of the biggest investor we have ever had because you are jealous. You have always been jealous of me." "Jealous of what exactly?" I asked, letting a soft, genuinely amused laugh escape my lips. "You walked into a lobby on your first day, threw a temper tantrum over a green suit, and fired the lead strategist on a $3 billion merger without even bothering to read the client dossier. Julian Sterling did not walk out because I embarrassed you. He walked out because you opened your mouth and proved you are entirely incompetent." My father slammed his hand down on the marble countertop. "Enough!" he roared, leaning over the island to try and intimidate me with his physical presence. "I am not playing this sibling rivalry nonsense today, Kendra. Do you have any idea what is at stake here? Vanguard Financial is drowning. If we do not close the Sterling merger by Friday, our creditors are going to start calling in their loans. I will lose the company. We will lose everything." "You will lose everything," I corrected him calmly. "My bills are paid." The sheer audacity of my response made him recoil. His shock quickly morphed into a deeply ingrained manipulative rage. He resorted to the same toxic guilt trips he had used to control me since I was a teenager. "How dare you speak to me with that kind of disrespect?" he snarled, his voice vibrating with disgust. "After everything I have done for you, I put a roof over your head. I paid for your food while you were wasting your 20s on your little side projects. I gave you a job at a top-tier firm when no one else would look twice at a state school graduate. You owe this family your loyalty, Kendra. You owe me." I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back. The scrape of the wood against the floor was the only sound in the room. I met his furious glare without an ounce of the fear I used to feel. "I owe you absolutely nothing," I stated, enunciating every single word. "I worked 70-hour weeks for a fraction of what you pay your junior male executives. I built the risk assessment models that kept your doors open during the recession. I covered up Jada's catastrophic accounting errors for 3 years so you could maintain the illusion of your perfect golden child. You did not give me a job out of charity, Dad. You kept me in the basement because you wanted my genius without having to share the credit." Jada let out a shrill, mocking scoff. "Your genius? Please, you are a glorified human calculator. You do not have the polish, the pedigree, or the sophistication to sit at the adult's table. Sterling is just throwing a tantrum because he does not like change. Once Dad and I get him back in the boardroom, I will smooth this over in 10 minutes. "Then why are you standing in my kitchen?" I asked, tilting my head. "If you are so capable, go smooth it over. Go call Julian Sterling right now and wow him with your Ivy League polish." Jada's face flushed a deep, blotchy crimson. She knew she could not. She did not even have Sterling's contact information, let alone his respect. Her eyes darted wildly around the room, desperate to find an angle, a weakness, anything she could use to regain the upper hand. Suddenly her gaze snapped to the glowing screen of my open laptop resting on the island. I had been running a final diagnostic on the proprietary predictive algorithms I had developed, the exact algorithms Sterling required for his merger. The complex strings of code and data models were clearly visible on the monitor. Jada's eyes widened with malicious realization. She pointed at the screen. "Dad, look. She is stealing company property. Those are the Vanguard algorithms." Before I could even register her intent, Jada lunged across the marble island. Her manicured hands reached frantically for my laptop, desperate to snatch the device and claim my intellectual property as her own to save the deal. She did not anticipate my reflexes. I did not panic. I simply brought my hands down hard on the top of the monitor. The heavy metal casing of the laptop slammed shut with a violent crack, trapping Jada's fingers directly between the keyboard and the screen. Jada let out a piercing, high-pitched shriek. She yanked her hands back, cradling her bruised fingers against her chest, her face contorting in pain and shock. "Are you out of your mind?" she screamed, tears springing to her eyes as she backed away from the island. "You could have broken my fingers." I placed both of my hands flat on top of the closed laptop, securing it. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. "Touch my property again, Jada, and you will leave here with a lot more than a bruised ego." My father stepped around the island, placing himself between me and his precious youngest daughter. He glared at me as if I were a stranger, his chest heaving with furious breaths. A new, far more dangerous standoff had just begun, and the air in the penthouse was thick with absolute hostility. "Are you actually threatening your sister in front of me?" Elijah demanded, his voice shaking with a terrifying suppressed rage. He stepped closer, attempting to use his height to force me into submission. "You slam a computer on her hands and then threaten her. Have you completely lost your mind, Kendra? I am not the one who broke into a private residence," I replied, my voice steady, not retreating a single inch. "And I am not threatening anyone. I am stating a very clear legal boundary. That laptop is my personal property. If Jada attempts to steal it again, I will have building security detain her for attempted theft." Jada let out a dramatic, breathless scoff, clutching her hands against her chest, as if she had just survived a brutal assault. "Stealing. You are the thief here, Kendra. You are holding Vanguard financial property hostage. Those predictive algorithms belong to the company. Dad paid you to create them. You are committing corporate sabotage, and I will personally see to it that you are prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." I looked at my younger sister, marveling at her absolute lack of fundamental business knowledge. "You truly have no idea how anything works, do you?" I asked, my tone dripping with genuine pity. "Dad did not pay me to create those algorithms. Dad paid me a junior analyst salary to balance the books and fix your constant glaring math errors so the board would not realize their new executive vice president cannot even read a basic profit and loss statement." Jada opened her mouth to scream, but I cut her off instantly, my voice ringing clear and hard through the kitchen. I built those predictive models on my own time. I continued tapping the aluminum shell of the closed laptop. I coded every single line on this personal machine. I paid for the software licenses out of my own pocket. I worked on them at night on weekends and on holidays while you two were busy taking clients on luxury golf retreats. There is absolutely nothing in Vanguard's servers, nothing in Vanguard's budget, and nothing in Vanguard's intellectual property filings that connects to my work. You do not own my brain, Dad, and you certainly do not own my code. Elijah's face hardened. He knew I was right. He had always known. He intentionally kept me off the official development payroll precisely because he was too cheap to properly fund an analytics division. He thought he was exploiting a loophole to save money. He never realized he was giving me total ownership of the firm's only lifeline. You listened to me very carefully, Elijah said, dropping his voice into the low menacing register he used to intimidate rival executives. I built Vanguard Financial from the ground up. I built a legacy of black excellence in a city that wanted to see me fail. I did not spend 30 years breaking glass ceilings just to have my own ungrateful daughter tear down our empire because she feels underappreciated. You are a part of this family. That makes your work part of this family. You will open that laptop and you will transfer the Sterling files to Jada right now. We have to present a united front. A united front. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed off the high ceilings. You did not want a united front this morning when you let her fire me in the middle of the lobby. You did not care about family legacy when you stood by and let her call me an embarrassment in front of the entire staff. You only care about unity now because Julian Sterling walked out the door with $3 billion, and your creditors are about to realize Vanguard is an empty shell. My father's jaw clenched so tight the muscle visibly ticked. The polished, charismatic CEO facade completely melted away, leaving behind a desperate, cornered man. He realized that pulling corporate rank would not work. He realized that appealing to family loyalty was useless. So he pivoted directly to the only weapon he thought he had left: financial warfare. Fine, Elijah said, his tone turning deadly cold. If you want to play hardball, we will play hardball. You turn 35 next Tuesday, do you not? I did not react, but I felt a small, triumphant spark ignite in my chest. I knew exactly where he was going. Grandpa Theodore's trust fund matures the day you turn 35. Elijah continued, a cruel, victorious smile spreading across his face. A very substantial amount of money. Life-changing money. Money that you are probably counting on to pay the mortgage on this ridiculous penthouse. Jada's eyes lit up. She dropped her injured victim act immediately, practically vibrating with excitement as she caught on to our father's strategy. Oh, you are going to be ruined, Kendra, Jada sneered. I am the legal executor of Theodore's estate, Elijah stated, taking a slow, deliberate step toward me. I have full discretionary power over the disbursement of those funds until the exact hour of your birthday. And as the executor, I have the legal right to contest the payout. I can tell the trust attorneys that you are demonstrating erratic, unstable behavior. I can cite your violent outburst against your sister today as proof that you are mentally unfit to manage such a large sum. I can tie that money up in probate court for the next 2 decades. He leaned forward, placing both hands flat on my kitchen island, invading my space. You will be bankrupt before the lawyers even finish filing the paperwork. I maintained my posture, looking directly into his eyes without a single flinch. Is that your final offer, Dad Extortion? It is an ultimatum, Elijah corrected smoothly, his confidence fully restored. You have exactly 24 hours. You will bring that laptop to my office tomorrow morning. You will hand over every single line of code, every algorithm, and every financial model to Jada. You will sit at your old desk and you will do your job under your sister's direct supervision until the Julian Sterling deal is closed and the funds are secured in Vanguard's accounts. He paused, letting the heavy threat hang in the quiet air of the penthouse. If you refuse, Elijah whispered, I will call the trust attorneys tomorrow morning at 9. I will legally block every single cent of your inheritance. You will get absolutely nothing. You will lose this apartment. You will lose your little consulting side business. You will be back on the street, and I will personally ensure that no financial firm in this country ever hires you again." Jada let out a breathless, triumphant laugh. She walked over to the front door, pulling it open. "You heard him, Kendra. You have 24 hours to remember your place. Do not be late tomorrow. I expect my coffee on my desk by 8. Elijah straightened his suit jacket, shooting me one last look of absolute disdain. "Think very carefully about how cold the real world is without my protection, Kendra." He turned and walked out the door, his heavy footsteps echoing down the corridor. Jada followed closely behind him, flashing me a wicked, arrogant grin before slamming my own front door in my face. The heavy lock clicked into place. I stood alone in the absolute silence of my kitchen. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not panic about losing my grandfather's millions or losing my home. I simply reached over, picked up my mug of jasmine tea, and poured the remaining cold liquid down the stainless steel sink. I walked across the spacious living room, my heels clicking softly on the wood, toward a massive, vibrant, abstract painting hanging on the far wall. I reached behind the heavy canvas and pressed a hidden latch. The painting swung outward on a concealed hinge, revealing a digital wall safe embedded directly into the steel framework of the building. I rapidly punched in a 12-digit biometric code. The heavy metal door popped open with a heavy thud. Inside, stacked neatly on the top shelf, were several thick, legal-sized folders, bearing the embossed gold seal of the city's most prestigious private wealth management firm. I pulled out the thickest folder, feeling the satisfying weight of the documents in my hands. Every page was signed, notarized, and stamped with official federal banking seals. I walked back to the kitchen island, picked up my cell phone, and dialed a private encrypted number. It rang exactly once before a sharp professional voice answered. "Marcus speaking." "Marcus, it is Kendra," I said, looking down at the immaculate legal document spread across my marble counter. "Yes, they just left my building. Listen to me carefully. Elijah is going to try to contact the estate lawyers tomorrow morning to freeze the trust accounts. I need your team on standby." I traced my finger over the signature line of the top document, a cold, bright smile breaking across my face. "Let him try to freeze it," I told my wealth manager, my voice ringing with absolute certainty. "They do not realize I already legally transferred all of grandfather's assets into a blind offshore trust 3 months ago. The Vanguard accounts are completely empty. Let my father scream at a brick wall tomorrow." I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the counter. My father thought he was a master chess player, but he had not realized I took his king a long time ago. He wanted to play hardball with my life. He was about to find out that I owned the entire stadium. The morning sun filtered through the tinted floor to ceiling glass of the Onyx Room, an exclusive members-only coffee house located in the heart of the financial district. The air inside smelled of roasted espresso beans and quiet, expensive deals. I was seated in a curved leather booth, smoothing out the lapels of my tailored ivory blazer. I had just concluded a breakfast meeting with the chief financial officer of a European logistics conglomerate. We had finalized the terms of my independent consulting retainer, a contract that would easily secure my firm a 7-figure revenue stream for the upcoming quarter. He had shaken my hand with profound respect, thanked me for my unparalleled market insights, and departed for his flight back to Geneva. I felt a profound sense of peace. The panic that my father and Jada had attempted to instill in me the night before had completely failed to take root. They were drowning in the consequences of their own arrogance, and I was finally breathing free air. Before I could even unlock my tablet to review my morning emails, a shadow fell across my table. Preston slid into the booth opposite me, not bothering to ask for permission. He was Jada's husband, a man whose entire existence was a monument to unearned privilege. He wore a custom-tailored Tom Ford suit that had been paid for entirely by my father's firm, and a luxury watch that Jada had bought him for their anniversary using her executive expense account. Preston was Vanguard Financial's lead corporate counsel, a title my father had practically handed him on a silver platter the moment he married Jada. Elijah had been so desperate to align the Vanguard legacy with Preston's generational country club background that he had completely ignored the fact that Preston had never actually won a major corporate case on his own merit. Preston signaled a passing waiter, pointing to my espresso cup and holding up a finger to order one for himself. He leaned back against the leather upholstery, crossing his legs and resting his ankle on his knee. He looked at me with a distinctly practiced, condescending smile. "I see you are still wearing loud colors, Kendra." Preston began, his tone dripping with the kind of polished elitism he used to mask his deep-seated insecurities. "It is a bit aggressive for a Tuesday morning, do you not think? But then again, you have always struggled with the subtle nuances of professional presentation. It is exactly why Elijah kept you out of the client-facing roles." I did not respond. I simply rested my hands on the table and let him dig his own grave. "You see, Kendra, you lack a certain pedigree." Preston continued, leaning forward, lowering his voice as if he were explaining a complex concept to a slow child. "You went to a state school. You lack the cultural refinement required to operate in the upper echelons of high finance. You are fundamentally a back-office worker. There is no shame in that. We all have our roles. But you people always seem to struggle with understanding your limitations. You get a little taste of the boardroom, and suddenly you think you are sophisticated enough to play in the big leagues." The racial undertones of his phrasing hung heavily in the air between us. It was not a new tactic. Preston had spent the last 4 years casually dropping racially tinged microaggressions, masking his outright bigotry beneath a veneer of corporate superiority. He viewed my father's wealth as a convenient stepping stone, a resource to be extracted. He leeches off the Vanguard empire, spending Elijah's money to fund his golf memberships and private club fees, while secretly looking down on the very black family that elevated him from a mediocre junior associate to a lead corporate counsel. He tolerated my father and worshipped Jada only because they provided him with a lifestyle he could never achieve on his own. And he despised me because I was the only person in the family who saw exactly what he was. "You really stepped out of line yesterday," Preston said, shaking his head with mock disappointment as the waiter set a fresh espresso down in front of him. "Firing you was the smartest thing Jada has ever done. You were becoming a massive liability to our corporate image, but intentionally sabotaging the Sterling merger. That was a catastrophic mistake." He reached inside his Italian leather briefcase and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He slapped it down hard on the wooden table, pushing it directly across the surface until it hit the edge of my tablet. "This is a formal cease and desist order," Preston announced, his voice hardening into a legal threat. "I drafted it myself at 3 in the morning. I glanced down at the envelope but made absolutely no move to touch it. You are currently in direct violation of the corporate non-compete clause you signed when you were hired," Preston dictated, leaning forward, his blue eyes narrowing with malicious intent. "Furthermore, you have committed gross intellectual property theft. Those predictive algorithms you are holding hostage belong entirely to Vanguard Financial. I do not care if you coded them on your personal laptop. You utilized company data, and you developed them while under the employment of our firm. That makes every single line of code the exclusive property of Vanguard." Preston tapped the manila envelope with his index finger. "If you do not hand over the source code, I am going to file a $10 million lawsuit against you before the courts close today. We will sue you for corporate espionage, tortious interference, and breach of contract. I will personally see to it that your bank accounts are frozen. I will have the deed to that ridiculous new penthouse you just bought seized as collateral. You will be entirely bankrupt, Kendra. You will spend the rest of your life buried under insurmountable legal fees, and no reputable firm will ever hire a disgraced litigious analyst." He paused, letting the sheer weight of his threats settle over the table. He was attempting to employ shock and awe tactics, trying to overwhelm my senses so I would capitulate without questioning his legal standing. He was desperate. I could see the faint sheen of sweat forming on his forehead. If Vanguard Financial collapsed because the Sterling deal fell through, Preston's luxurious lifestyle would instantly evaporate. He was fighting for his own survival, using me as a human shield. "However," Preston said, his tone softening into a manipulative, coercive purr, We are family. Elijah and Jada are willing to be generous. Inside that envelope is a secondary document. It is a full transfer of rights. All you have to do is sign the algorithms over to Vanguard, explicitly naming Jada as the lead developer. Then you are going to pick up your phone call, Julian Sterling, and inform him that you are voluntarily transferring his account to Jada's direct supervision. He took a slow sip of his espresso, his eyes locked onto mine with absolute unwarranted arrogance. You sign the transfer and we drop the $10 million lawsuit, Preston concluded. You walk away clean. You get to keep your little apartment, and we will even write you a moderate severance check so you can figure out your next move. It is a very generous offer, Kendra. I highly suggest you take a pen out of your bag right now and sign the document. You simply do not have the legal firepower to fight me on this. I did not flinch. My heart rate did not elevate. I sat in perfect, terrifying stillness, studying the desperate, bigoted man sitting across from me. He genuinely believed he had backed me into a corner. He genuinely believed that his Ivy League degree and his white corporate privilege made him legally invincible. I slowly reached out, wrapping my fingers around the delicate handle of my teacup. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea, savoring the floral notes, intentionally dragging out the silence until the tension in Preston's shoulders became visibly unbearable. I set the cup down gently on the saucer. Then I reached into my designer handbag. I did not pull out a pen. I pulled out a small encrypted silver flash drive. I placed the metal drive on the table and slowly slid it across the polished wood until it rested directly on top of his cease and desist envelope. You did not read the fine print, did you? Preston? Preston stared at the small silver flash drive resting on top of his intimidating legal envelope. He let out a harsh, patronizing breath, shaking his head as if he were dealing with a deeply confused toddler. A flash drive, Kendra Preston asked, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. What is this, a digital arts and crafts project? I just handed you a lawsuit that will absolutely decimate your entire life, and you are offering me a USB stick. I do not have time for your amateur theatrics. You are going to sign the transfer document right now, or I am walking straight to the courthouse. I did not break eye contact. I reached out, picked up the flash drive, and plugged it directly into the side of my tablet. I tapped the screen twice, opened a specific file, and then slowly turned the tablet around so it faced him perfectly. You should really read it, Preston, I said, my voice smooth and utterly devoid of panic. Because, unlike you, I actually do my homework. Preston scoffed, leaning forward to glance at the high-resolution screen. His blue eyes scanned the top of the digital document. It was a faded, scanned PDF of a contract dated exactly 10 years ago. It bore my signature, my father's signature, and the official stamp of a public notary. I watched as Preston's eyes moved from the header down to the bolded title of the agreement. The smug, arrogant smirk began to slip from his face, replaced by a deep, sudden confusion. When my father brought me into Vanguard Financial 10 years ago, I began keeping my tone strictly conversational. He needed my mathematical modeling to save his failing third-quarter projections. I had just graduated and I needed the income. But Elijah Vanguard has always been an exceptionally cheap man when it comes to anyone other than himself and Jada. Offering me a full-time salaried position meant he would have been legally obligated to provide me with corporate benefits. He would have had to pay for my health insurance, my dental plan, and match my retirement contributions. Preston was silently reading the screen, his breathing growing noticeably shallower. So my father instructed the firm's previous corporate counsel to draft a very specific employment agreement. I continued, leaning back into the leather booth. He bypassed the standard employee onboarding process entirely to save himself a few $1,000s a year. That document right there is not a standard employee contract. I was never legally an employee of Vanguard Financial. For the last 10 years, I've been classified exclusively as an independent contractor. Preston swallowed hard. His hand moved toward his expensive silk tie, adjusting the knot as if the collar of his custom shirt had suddenly grown too tight. I reached across the table and scrolled down to page 4 of the document, tapping my manicured nail against a specific highlighted paragraph. Let us review the intellectual property clause together, Preston, I offered cheerfully. As the lead corporate counsel, you should be intimately familiar with the work-for-hire doctrine under state law. Because I was legally designated as an independent contractor, any intellectual property I created outside the strict, explicitly outlined parameters of my daily assigned duties remained my sole and exclusive property. But you used company servers, Preston interjected, his voice losing its polished, booming authority. It sounded thin and slightly frantic. You built those algorithms on Vanguard time. That makes them corporate assets. I laughed softly, a sound of pure, unadulterated victory. Wrong again, I replied. Vanguard never commissioned those predictive models. My father did not even know the algorithms existed until Julian Sterling praised them in the lobby yesterday. I built that code entirely on my own time. I used open-source market trends fed through a machine learning script that I built on a personal server I rent out of my own pocket. I paid for the software licenses myself. There is not a single line of code, not a single data point, and not a single receipt that connects my algorithm to Vanguard Financial's infrastructure. Preston stared at the screen, his face draining of all color. He looked like a man who had just stepped out of an airplane only to realize he had forgotten to pack his parachute. And as for your terrifying cease and desist order, I said, gesturing casually toward the manila envelope he had slammed on the table moments ago, you are trying to enforce a non-compete clause. But you cannot hold an independent contractor to a non-compete agreement in this state without providing guaranteed severance or continuing financial compensation, neither of which Vanguard offered when Jada publicly terminated my contract yesterday morning. I folded my hands on the table, leaning in close so he could hear every single syllable over the quiet hum of the coffee shop. Your non-compete is void. Your intellectual property claim is completely baseless. Your $10 million lawsuit is a frivolous, embarrassing piece of garbage, I stated, stripping away the last remaining shreds of his corporate dignity. The algorithms belong entirely to me. I can sell them to Julian Sterling, I can sell them to Vanguard's biggest competitors, or I can simply delete them. You have absolutely no legal leverage to stop me. You would know all of this if you had actually bothered to read my personnel file instead of spending your mornings playing golf on my father's dime. Preston sat completely paralyzed. The reality of his failure was crashing down on him in real time. He had walked into this coffee shop expecting to bully a subordinate into submission. Instead, he had walked directly into a meticulously prepared legal trap. He knew that if he returned to the Vanguard executive offices empty-handed, the Sterling deal was dead. If the deal died, Vanguard Financial would inevitably face bankruptcy within the month. And if Vanguard went under, Preston's entire lifestyle, his country club memberships, his luxury cars, his carefully curated image of wealth would vanish instantly. He looked at me, his blue eyes wide with rising panic. He took a shaky breath, physically shaking his head as if trying to reboot his brain. He needed a new strategy, and he needed it immediately. Kendra, listen to me, Preston stammered, dropping his voice to a desperate, placating whisper. He put his hands up, palms facing outward in a gesture of surrender. Let us just take a breath. Let us be reasonable here. There is absolutely no need to make this adversarial. I raised an eyebrow, watching him squirm. Adversarial. You just threatened to bankrupt me and seize my home 5 minutes ago. We got off on the wrong foot, Preston insisted, forcing a tight, incredibly unnatural smile. He leaned forward, attempting to project an aura of familial solidarity. You know how Elijah gets when he is under pressure. He put Jada in a terrible position yesterday. She is just trying to make him proud, and she acted rashly. We all make mistakes, but at the end of the day, Kendra, we are family. The absolute hypocrisy of his words was staggering. He had just spent the last 10 minutes throwing racial microaggressions in my face, calling me unrefined and telling me I did not belong in his world. Now, staring down the barrel of his own financial ruin, he suddenly wanted to play the role of the supportive brother-in-law. We are all on the same team, Preston pleaded, his voice dripping with artificial sincerity. If Vanguard sinks, we all sink. Do not do this to your sister. We can work this out quietly. I can authorize a highly lucrative consulting fee for you. We will pay you for the algorithms off the books tax-free, whatever you want. Just hand over the flash drive so we can close the Sterling deal and save the family legacy. We need you, Kendra. I stared at him for a long, silent moment. I let him sit in his own pathetic desperation, watching the sweat bead on his forehead. I felt no pity. I felt no familial obligation. I only felt the cold, hard satisfaction of a decade of invisible labor finally paying off. Family, I repeated softly, tasting the word on my tongue. 10 minutes ago, I was an uneducated state school graduate who lacked the sophistication to sit at your table. Now you want me to save your lifestyle. Preston opened his mouth to offer another pathetic excuse, but I did not let him speak. I am not sinking with a ship you intentionally drilled holes into, I said, my voice dropping to a sharp, unforgiving edge. I unclasped my designer handbag. I reached inside and pulled out a thick, bright red folder. I placed it on the table and slowly, deliberately slid it across the wood until it rested squarely on top of his useless cease and desist order. Before you threaten to sue me again, Preston, you might want to explain to my father why $250,000 is missing from the firm's escrow account. Preston stopped breathing. The air simply evacuated his lungs. He stared at the bright red folder as if it were an explosive device primed to detonate. The polished aristocratic sneer that had defined his face for the last decade completely vanished, replaced by a hollow, ghost-like pallor. He reached for his espresso cup, but his hand was trembling so violently that the porcelain rattled against the saucer. He quickly pulled his hand back and hid it beneath the table. "You are bluffing," Preston managed to say, though his voice was entirely stripped of its former baritone confidence. It came out as a thin, reedy whisper. "You have absolutely no access to the firm's escrow accounts. Those are locked behind triple encrypted legal firewalls. Only I have the authorization keys." I smiled, a slow, predatory expression that made him press his back harder against the leather booth. "You really do not understand what I did for Vanguard, do you?" I asked, keeping my voice at a pleasant conversational volume. "You thought I was just sitting in a cubicle formatting spreadsheets for Jada. But when you are the only person in the building who actually understands how to clean up a catastrophic data ledger, you get access to everything. Last month, while I was desperately trying to reconcile Jada's horrific mismanagement of the quarterly operational budget, I noticed a very strange anomaly in the back-end routing software. I reached over and flipped the red folder open. I ran a shadow audit, Preston. I traced the digital footprints. I found a recurring series of phantom retainer fees being drafted directly out of client escrow accounts. Vanguard clients were depositing millions in good faith to hold for corporate acquisitions, and you were quietly skimming off the top. You set up a ghost vendor account labeled as a third-party legal consultancy firm based in Delaware. But the IP address for the authorized transfers traced directly back to the secure router in your home office in the suburbs. Preston's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His perfectly styled hair suddenly looked slightly disheveled. $250,000, Preston. I tapped the printed spreadsheet resting on top of the pile. Siphoning from a client escrow account is the ultimate cardinal sin in the legal profession. It is an automatic, non-negotiable disbarment. You will never practice law again in any state. And because the amount exceeds federal thresholds, it is a felony wire fraud charge. You are looking at a mandatory minimum of 10 to 15 years in federal prison. "This is fabricated!" Preston choked out his eyes, darting frantically around the coffee shop as if expecting federal agents to walk through the glass doors. "You manufactured this data to blackmail me." I leaned forward, closing the distance between us. "Go ahead and take the folder to the authorities," then I challenged him. "Show them my fabricated data. Let them run a forensic audit on your bank accounts. Let us see what they find." Preston physically deflated. The tailored Tom Ford suit suddenly looked 2 sizes too large for his frame. The arrogant country club golden boy shattered into a million pathetic pieces right in front of my eyes. He covered his face with his hands, letting out a ragged, desperate sound that was half gasp, half sob. "You cannot show this to Elijah." Preston begged, dropping his hands. His blue eyes were wide, glassy, and completely terrified. He leaned across the table, completely invading my personal space, practically pleading. "Kendra, I am begging you. If Elijah sees this, he will kill me. He will utterly destroy me. Jada will divorce me. I will lose my kids. I will lose everything. I watched him grovel, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold clinical satisfaction. Why did you do it? I demanded, my tone flat. Preston swallowed hard, looking down at his expensive watch. Gambling, he confessed, his voice breaking. Underground sports betting and high-stakes poker. It started small. Just a few thousand here and there at private games with other executives. But I got in too deep. I had a terrible run last season. I owe a massive amount of money to people who do not care about corporate non-competes or cease and desist letters. They threatened to come to my house, Kendra. They threatened Jada. I panicked. I just needed a bridge loan. I was going to put the money back into the escrow account as soon as I hit a winning streak. I swear to you, I was going to replace every single cent. I sat back staring at the man who had just insulted my education, my background, and my worth less than 10 minutes ago. You stole $250,000 from innocent clients to pay off underground bookies, and you actually have the audacity to sit there and call yourself refined. I asked, my voice dripping with absolute disgust. You sit in your mansions judging people like me for having to work for a living while you operate like a common criminal in a tailored suit. You are a parasite, Preston. Kendra. Please, he whispered, tears actually pooling in the corners of his eyes. I will do whatever you want. I will drop the lawsuit. I will rip up the cease and desist right now. I will convince Elijah to let you keep the algorithms. Just name your price. We are family. You have to help me. I slowly reached out and closed the red folder. I do not make deals with thieves, I stated, picking up my handbag and sliding out of the leather booth. And we are certainly not family. You have exactly 7 days. Preston looked up, his face twisted in confusion. 7 days for what? 168 hours, I clarified, standing tall and looking down at him. You have exactly 1 week to replace every single dollar you stole from that escrow account. You will sell your luxury cars. You will liquidate your hidden stock portfolios. You will beg your wealthy country club friends for a loan. I do not care how you do it, but you will put the money back. If I check the ledger next Tuesday morning and the account is short by a single penny, I am sending this entire folder directly to the State Bar Association, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the district attorney, and I will personally hand-deliver a copy to my father. Preston began to hyperventilate. His chest heaved as he grabbed the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. Kendra, I cannot raise that kind of liquid cash in a week. It is impossible. That sounds like a you problem, Preston. I turned away, adjusting my blazer. Enjoy your espresso. I walked out of the Onyx room without looking back. The heavy glass doors slid shut behind me, muting the quiet murmur of the coffee shop. The crisp morning air hit my face, and I took a deep, cleansing breath. For the first time in my life, I held absolute, undeniable power over the people who had spent a decade trying to keep me beneath their boots. Preston was neutralized. The Vanguard algorithms were mine. My future was finally my own to dictate. I walked down the bustling city sidewalk, the sharp clicking of my heels matching the steady, triumphant rhythm of my heartbeat. I reached the corner where the valet had parked my car. As I reached out to open the door, my cell phone vibrated violently in my handbag. I pulled it out and glanced at the caller identification screen. It was not Preston, it was not Jada, it was Elijah Vanguard. I stared at the name for a long moment. He had never called my personal cell phone during business hours. Usually he had his executive assistant summon me to his office like a truant schoolchild. I swiped the screen and brought the phone to my ear, remaining completely silent, waiting for him to make the first move. Kendra. My dear Elijah's voice floated through the speaker. The tone was jarring. There was no barking, no condescension, no threats of freezing my grandfather's trust fund. His voice was smooth, warm, and coated in the kind of paternal affection he usually reserved exclusively for Jada. It was the exact voice he used when he was trying to close a massive client who was on the verge of walking away. "What do you want, Dad?" I asked, skipping the pleasantries entirely. I want to apologize, Elijah said smoothly, without missing a single beat. I want to admit that I handled the situation yesterday with a severe lack of grace. Jada acted impulsively, and I let my temper get the better of me at your apartment. We are businessmen, Kendra, but more importantly, we are family. We should not be treating each other this way. I realize now that you have built something truly extraordinary, and Vanguard Financial has severely undervalued your contributions. I leaned against the door of my car, my eyes narrowing. Elijah Vanguard did not apologize unless there was a knife hidden behind his back. Get to the point, I demanded. I want to make a public peace offering. Elijah continued his tone, remaining perfectly polished and unbothered by my hostility. The firm is hosting its annual charity gala this Saturday evening at the Grand Atrium. It is the most important social event of our corporate calendar. Julian Sterling will be there along with the rest of our elite board members. I want you there, Kendra. I want you to sit at the head table with me and your sister. I want to publicly recognize your achievements and formally welcome you into the executive inner circle. Let us put this unpleasantness behind us and present a united front to the city. I stared out at the morning traffic rushing past me. A public recognition, an invitation to the head table. It was everything I had foolishly craved when I first started working at his firm 10 years ago. It was the exact bait he knew would have worked on the old me. He was terrified. He knew Preston had failed. He knew I still held the algorithms, and he knew Julian Sterling was watching his every move. This gala was not a peace offering. It was a highly orchestrated trap designed to force me into a public corner surrounded by his wealthy allies, where I would be pressured to hand over my life's work to save face in front of the city's elite. I will be there, Dad, I replied, my voice completely smooth, revealing absolutely nothing of the cold calculation running through my mind. Wonderful Elijah beamed his relief, practically radiating through the phone. I will have my assistant send the VIP passes to your penthouse immediately. Dress to impress, my dear. We have a lot of eyes on us. He ended the call. I lowered the phone, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face. He thought he was luring a naive analyst into a corporate ambush. He had no idea he was inviting the architect of his own destruction directly to the main stage. I opened my car door and slid into the driver's seat. The game was no longer being played in the shadows. We were taking it to the spotlight. I sat in the driver's seat of my car, the engine idling quietly in the designated valet zone outside the coffee shop. My phone vibrated against the leather console, delivering a high-priority push notification from the city's premier financial business journal. I picked up the device, swiped down on the screen, and read the bold, breaking headline. Vanguard Financial CEO to honor daughter at annual Black Excellence Gala. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh, tossing the phone onto the passenger seat. Elijah had not simply invited me to a party. He had issued a digital, highly publicized hostage note. The article detailed how Vanguard Financial, a recognized titan of minority-owned corporate wealth, was dedicating the evening's festivities to family unity and corporate innovation. It explicitly named me as the guest of honor, praising my behind-the-scenes dedication and claiming the firm was finally ready to bring my independent algorithms under the official Vanguard umbrella. My father was masterfully weaponizing his status in the community. He had spent 30 years building an ironclad reputation as a pioneer, a man who broke through the hostile glass ceilings of white-dominated high finance to build an empire. He knew exactly how the media worked, and he knew exactly how to manipulate community optics. If I boycotted the gala tonight, the press would paint me as a bitter, ungrateful child, attempting to tear down a historic Black institution out of petty jealousy. If I refused to hand over my predictive algorithms, he would leak a narrative claiming I was selling out my own family's legacy to the highest bidder. He was wrapping his extortion in the unimpeachable flag of community pride. It was a brilliant cornering chess move, but he was playing against the ghost of the daughter I used to be. I shifted the car into gear and drove directly back to my penthouse. I walked straight into my master closet, bypassing the racks of designer shoes to stand in front of my corporate wardrobe. For 10 years I had dressed to disappear. My father and sister had strictly mandated a uniform of muted grays, shapeless navy slacks, and conservative beige blouses. They wanted me to look like a back-office drone, a human calculator who faded entirely into the drywall of the accounting department, so Jada could shine in her vibrant, tailored designer suits. They had systematically stripped away my femininity and presence to ensure I never outshone the designated golden child. Tonight, the beige blazers were staying on their hangers. I reached into the back of the closet and unzipped a heavy protective garment bag. I had purchased this gown 3 months ago in Paris on the exact same afternoon I legally transferred my grandfather's estate into an offshore blind trust. It was a floor-length structural masterpiece in a deep commanding shade of emerald green, the color of money, of growth, of absolute control. The silk fabric draped perfectly across my figure, featuring a sharp, asymmetrical neckline and a high slit that demanded attention without begging for it. It was not the dress of a compliant, terrified subordinate. It was the armor of a chief executive officer who owned the room before she even stepped across the threshold. I paired the gown with my grandfather's vintage diamond drop earrings, a subtle but deeply personal nod to the true wealth I now controlled. I applied a bold, unapologetic crimson lipstick, smoothing a stray curl back from my face. I looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror. The invisible Vanguard analyst was dead. I was walking into the Grand Atrium tonight as the sole owner of the most valuable financial asset in the city. The Grand Atrium was a cathedral of unadulterated wealth. Valets rushed to open the doors of luxury sedans, while the rapid, blinding flashbulbs of society photographers illuminated the grand entryway. I stepped out of my hired town car, immediately ignoring the sudden rush of frantic whispers from the Vanguard executive staff lingering by the velvet ropes. They recognized my face, but they did not recognize the woman wearing it. I walked through the massive gilded doors and straight into the main ballroom. The space was spectacular, dripping in cascading crystal chandeliers and towering architectural arrangements of white orchids. A live jazz orchestra played a smooth, low-tempo melody over the steady clinking of champagne flutes. The room was packed shoulder to shoulder with the city's elite venture capitalists, hedge fund managers, real estate developers, and political power brokers. I paused at the top of the grand staircase, surveying the crowd. I instantly located my targets. Elijah and Jada were holding court near the center of the room, standing right beside Julian Sterling. Elijah wore a bespoke velvet tuxedo, projecting absolute charismatic confidence, while Jada stood uncomfortably close to Julian, wearing a heavily sequined silver gown that looked desperate for attention. They were laughing warmly, aggressively, performing the roles of the brilliant patriarch and his genius protege for the surrounding investors. I began navigating down the staircase and through the dense crowd, my emerald gown cutting a striking, undeniable path through the sea of standard black tuxedos and muted evening wear. Julian Sterling looked up mid-conversation. His eyes widened with genuine recognition and deep respect as he spotted me approaching the circle. Jada immediately followed his gaze. The forced camera-ready smile on her face instantly shattered. Pure, unadulterated panic flared in her eyes as she took in my appearance and my total lack of fear. She quickly excused herself from Julian, abandoning her crystal champagne flute on a passing waiter's silver tray, and marched directly toward me like a heat-seeking missile. She intercepted me behind a towering, multi-tiered ice sculpture, completely blocking me from Julian's line of sight. Jada grabbed my elbow, her manicured acrylic nails digging painfully into my bare skin as she attempted to physically muscle me backward. "What exactly do you think you are doing?" Jada hissed, her voice vibrating with a frantic, suppressed rage. She looked me up and down, her eyes flashing with unmistakable vitriolic jealousy at the emerald gown. "You look like a desperate reality television star. You are embarrassing us. Elijah told you to come here to publicly apologize and hand over the drive, not to parade around like you own the place. You are completely out of your depth, Kendra. Get to table 42 in the back by the kitchen doors before you ruin this deal for me." I looked down at the trembling hand gripping my arm. I did not pull away. I did not flinch. I simply stared at her manicured fingers until the sheer weight of my icy, unblinking silence forced her to loosen her grip and drop her hand entirely. I slowly brushed off my silk sleeve where she had touched me. "I am not here to sit at the children's table, Jada," I replied, my voice perfectly level and devastatingly calm. "And I am certainly not here to apologize to anyone. I am here to watch you fail." Jada let out a sharp, incredulous breath, shaking her head. "You are completely delusional. You are going to sign the Sterling files over to me tonight in front of everyone. Preston drafted the transfer paperwork this morning. He is bringing it to the head table right now. You have absolutely no leverage left, Kendra. Dad checkmated you." I smiled. It was a slow, terrifying expression that made Jada take a physical step backward, her silver sequins catching the dim light as she retreated. "Preston is not going to be bringing you any paperwork tonight," I said, leaning in close so she could hear the absolute unshakable certainty in my voice. "Preston is currently locked inside his home office, hyperventilating into a paper bag, desperately trying to figure out how to replace $250,000 in stolen client escrow funds before I report him to the State Bar Association for felony wire fraud." All the color instantly drained from Jada's face. The arrogant, entitled glow of the designated golden child evaporated in a single second, leaving behind a pale, terrified shell of a woman. "What are you talking about?" Jada whispered, her voice trembling so badly I could barely hear her over the jazz music. "Preston would never do that. You are lying. You are just making things up to try and rattle me." "Ask him yourself," I suggested cheerfully, nodding toward the grand entrance doors. "If he even has the nerve to show up tonight, which I highly doubt. You might want to hold off on spending your quarterly executive bonus, Jada. You are going to need every single cent to pay for his federal defense attorney." Jada opened her mouth, her breathing turning shallow and erratic. She was completely unable to formulate a coherent response. She stood paralyzed behind the ice sculpture, her mind violently rejecting the realization that her perfect marriage and her flawless corporate image were entirely fabricated lies funded by stolen money. Before Jada could utter a single word of defense, the smooth, lively melody of the jazz orchestra abruptly ceased. The ambient chatter of the massive ballroom died down instantly as the heavy crystal chandeliers dimmed, plunging the expansive room into dramatic low lighting. A single brilliant spotlight pierced the darkness, illuminating the main stage at the front of the ballroom. Elijah Vanguard stood confidently at the clear acrylic podium. He adjusted his velvet lapels, radiating an aura of total unshakable control. He reached out and tapped the microphone twice, the sharp amplified sound echoing off the high ceilings and demanding absolute silence. He looked out over the sea of wealthy investors, intentionally bypassing the billionaires, the mayors, and the politicians. He scanned the darkened room until his gaze locked directly onto me, standing tall in my emerald gown. A slow, predatory smile spread across my father's face. The harsh, blinding glare of the stage follow spot cut through the dim ballroom, catching the silver threading in his custom velvet lapels. He stood at the clear acrylic podium like a seasoned televangelist, radiating a manufactured magnetic warmth that had successfully fooled boardrooms and billionaires for 3 decades. He adjusted the microphone, letting the ambient chatter of the 300 industry elites die down to a hushed, respectful silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elijah's voice boomed through the state-of-the-art sound system, smooth and deeply resonant. "Tonight we gather to celebrate a monumental milestone. We celebrate 30 years of Vanguard Financial. We celebrate the undeniable power of Black excellence, of building generational wealth from the ground up in a world that so often attempts to keep our doors firmly shut." The crowd murmured in polite, affluent agreement. I stood perfectly still near the back of the room, the emerald silk of my custom-tailored gown catching the dim light. I watched him weave his web. He was an absolute master of the room. He knew exactly how to play to his audience, striking the perfect balance between corporate titan and community patriarch. "But Vanguard has never just been a corporate entity," Elijah continued, placing a hand flat over his heart. "It is a family, and true legacy is about guiding the next generation. It is about catching those who stumble, lifting them up, and bringing them back into the fold." He paused, letting the dramatic silence build. He looked down at Julian Sterling, who was sitting in the VIP front row, and then deliberately dragged his gaze through the darkness until it locked directly onto me. "Many of you know my youngest daughter, Jada," Elijah said, gesturing toward the front tables. Jada, still deathly pale from learning about her husband's impending federal wire fraud charges, forced a stiff, terrified smile for the cameras. "You know her brilliant Ivy League mind. You have seen her exceptional leadership as our executive vice president." The crowd offered a warm, enthusiastic round of applause. Elijah raised his hands to quiet the room, his smile widening into something infinitely more dangerous. "But tonight," Elijah declared, his voice swelling with practiced paternal emotion, "tonight is about family unity. My eldest daughter, Kendra, has spent the last 10 years trying to find her footing. She has struggled to discover her place in this highly competitive industry. She has walked a difficult, solitary, and sometimes misguided path. But a father never gives up on his child." The collective gaze of 300 power brokers shifted simultaneously. The secondary spotlight swung across the ballroom, blinding me for a fraction of a second before perfectly illuminating my emerald gown. "I am thrilled to announce," Elijah proclaimed, projecting absolute triumph, "that Kendra is finally coming home. Effective immediately, she is rejoining Vanguard Financial. She will be bringing her independent projects under our corporate umbrella, working directly under Jada's brilliant Ivy League leadership to help execute our upcoming mergers. We are a family united. Kendra, please come up here and join us." The ballroom erupted into deafening applause. It was a perfectly executed, absolutely ruthless public ambush. Elijah had weaponized my race, my family legacy, and community optics against me. He had framed my decade of unpaid, unrecognized genius-level labor as a pathetic personal struggle. He had framed his desperate intellectual property theft as a gracious paternal rescue mission. If I turned around and walked out those gilded doors, I would instantly become the villain. The financial press would paint me as the bitter, unstable, estranged daughter throwing a temper tantrum at a charity gala, publicly humiliating a pillar of black enterprise. If I threw a fit, Julian Sterling would withdraw his $3 billion account before the valet even brought my car around. Elijah had pinned me in a highly publicized corner where my only apparent option was to walk up to that stage smile for the cameras and publicly accept my own demotion. I did not freeze, I did not glare, I smiled. I stepped out of the shadows and began walking toward the grand stage. My posture was impeccably straight. The emerald silk of my gown flowed flawlessly around me with every calculated step. I had shed the conservative, muted beige blazers my family had forced me to wear for 10 years to keep me invisible. I did not look like a lost, struggling daughter returning to the fold. I looked like a conquering chief executive officer surveying her newly acquired territory. The applause swelled as I ascended the carpeted steps. Elijah stepped away from the podium, opening his arms wide for a paternal embrace. He pulled me in close, aiming for my cheek, his voice dropping to a harsh, venomous whisper meant only for my ears over the sound of the clapping crowd. "You smile, you thank me, and you transfer those algorithms to Jada by midnight, or I will destroy your reputation in the press tomorrow morning." Elijah threatened, his fingers digging sharply into my spine. I placed my hands lightly on his velvet lapels, entirely unbothered by his extortion. I smoothly stepped back, breaking his grip completely, and stepped directly up to the acrylic podium. I slid the microphone smoothly from its stand, wrapping my fingers around the cool metal. I looked out over the sea of faces. I saw Julian Sterling watching me with intense, calculating interest. I saw Jada standing frozen near the front tables, looking as if she were about to faint. And I felt Elijah standing just 2 feet behind me, radiating a furious, controlling energy. "Thank you, Elijah," I began, my voice ringing crystal clear and completely steady through the ballroom speakers. A tiny ripple of confusion moved through the front rows. I did not call him Dad. It is truly an honor to stand before so many titans of industry tonight. I continued, making deliberate, sweeping eye contact with the key investors and board members. My father speaks of legacy. He speaks of the difficult path of finding one's footing. He is absolutely right. For the past 10 years, I have had the unique privilege of operating strictly behind the scenes. While the executive team enjoyed the spotlight of luxury networking and boardroom luncheons, I was in the trenches. I spent a decade doing the quiet, unseen labor that keeps financial empires from crumbling into dust. I paused, letting my words sink into the heavy silence of the room. Elijah shifted uncomfortably behind me. The narrative was rapidly slipping from his grasp, but my tone was so flawlessly polite and terrifyingly poised that he could not interrupt without causing the very public scene he was trying to avoid. I audited the raw ledgers. I stated, my voice projecting absolute authority. I built the predictive algorithms that turn failing quarterly projections into record-breaking profits. I learned exactly how a major firm operates from the absolute bottom to the very top. It has been a profound, irreplaceable learning experience. I have seen every single crack in the corporate foundation, and I have learned exactly how to fix them. Julian Sterling nodded slowly, a small, highly perceptive smile forming on his face. He knew exactly what I was talking about. He knew exactly who had actually saved his portfolio yesterday morning. I owe my father a great debt for this education, I said, turning my head just slightly to look at Elijah. The blood had completely drained from his face. His charismatic facade was violently cracking under the stage lights. He taught me the true value of my own work. He taught me that if you do not strictly own your intellectual property, you own nothing at all. I turned back to face the crowd gripping the edges of the podium. The entire room had gone completely deathly silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. However, I announced, my voice slicing through the silence like a freshly sharpened blade, my father is mistaken about one crucial detail tonight. I looked directly at Julian Sterling, locking eyes with the man who held the $3 billion key to Vanguard's survival. I am not returning to Vanguard Financial. I stated, my words echoing with absolute finality. I am not transferring my proprietary algorithms to anyone, and I am certainly not working under anyone's leadership but my own. A collective synchronized gasp rippled through the ballroom. 300 power brokers leaned forward in their seats. I could hear the frantic, rapid clicking of press cameras snapping photos from the back of the room. Behind me, I heard Elijah let out a sharp, breathless sound of pure panic. Tonight, I declared, raising my chin, I am officially announcing the launch of my own independent mergers and acquisitions firm. I will be taking my predictive models, my private server infrastructure, and my 10 years of hands-on foundational market expertise and opening my own doors. I took a slow, deep breath, delivering the final fatal blow to Elijah's empire. Welcome to Apex Vanguard. The ballroom instantly erupted. Shocked whispers violently tore through the crowd like a shockwave. Investors turned to each other in absolute disbelief. Julian Sterling leaned back in his chair, clapping his hands together in a slow, highly deliberate rhythm of pure respect. The name alone was a public execution. Apex Vanguard. I was not just leaving my father's legacy, I was actively conquering it. The name Apex Vanguard hung in the heavy, electrified air of the ballroom. Suddenly, a blur of silver sequins charged up the carpeted stairs of the main stage. Jada had completely snapped. The polished Ivy League executive mask she had worn her entire life dissolved into pure, unfiltered panic and rage. She lunged across the clear acrylic podium, her manicured hands clawing violently for the microphone I still held in my grasp. "Give me that," Jada shrieked. Her voice caught the edge of the microphone, amplifying a harsh, piercing burst of static across the massive ballroom. I did not struggle. I did not fight her for the metal stand. I simply took a graceful, measured step back in my emerald gown, releasing the microphone and allowing Jada to practically fall over the podium as she snatched it away. "She is a fraud," Jada screamed into the mic, her chest heaving as she pointed a trembling, accusatory finger directly at my face. The sheer volume of her voice made several investors in the front row physically flinch. "Do not listen to a single word she says. Kendra is a glorified secretary. She is a state school dropout who spent the last 10 years formatting spreadsheets because no reputable firm would ever hire her. She stole Vanguard property. She hacked into our mainframes. Apex Vanguard is a fantasy built entirely on stolen family assets." The ballroom fell into a suffocating, deeply uncomfortable silence. Jada was unraveling in real time, broadcasting her profound, deep-seated insecurity to 300 of the wealthiest individuals in the state. She looked desperate, frantic, and entirely unhinged. "She is mentally unstable," Jada continued, her voice echoing shrilly over the silent crowd. "We tried to help her. My father brought her here tonight out of charity and pity. She has absolutely no capital, no infrastructure, and no legal right to operate in this sector. Actually, she has my capital." The voice did not come from the stage. It resonated from the back of the room, projected smoothly through a secondary wireless microphone. The dense crowd parted instantly, splitting like the Red Sea, as Julian Sterling stepped out from the velvet-draped shadows of the VIP section. He held a sound technician's microphone in his right hand. His expression was completely composed, but his eyes locked onto Jada with a lethal, unforgiving intensity. Jada froze, her mouth hung open, the microphone slipping slightly in her sweaty grip. Elijah, who had been advancing toward me to assist Jada in the stage ambush, stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes widening in horror. Julian Sterling walked slowly down the center aisle, the secondary spotlight instinctively following his path. Every single hedge fund manager, venture capitalist, and political power broker in the room turned to watch him. He was the undisputed kingmaker of the financial district. Where he moved his money, the entire market inevitably followed. "I despise corporate theft," Julian stated, his voice smooth, resonant, and dripping with authority. "And I despise being lied to even more. For the past 6 months, Vanguard Financial has presented me with a series of incredibly sophisticated, flawlessly executed predictive models." Elijah Vanguard and his executive vice president stood in my office and looked me directly in the eye, claiming absolute ownership of that genius. Julian stopped at the base of the stage. He looked up at Jada, who was practically shaking behind the acrylic podium. "But when my forensic auditors cross-referenced the back-end metadata of those algorithms yesterday afternoon, we found a single, undeniable digital signature." Julian continued, raising his voice so it carried to the furthest, darkest corners of the grand atrium. "Those models were not built on Vanguard corporate servers. They were entirely constructed on a private, independent network. A network owned, operated, and exclusively patented by Kendra." Jada gripped the edges of the podium, her knuckles turning bone white. "Julian, please, you do not understand the complex family dynamics at play here. She breached her employment contract." "There is no contract," Julian cut her off effortlessly. "My legal team pulled Kendra's corporate files this morning. She has been classified exclusively as an independent contractor for the last 10 years. A highly convenient tax loophole that Elijah actively exploited, which inadvertently granted Kendra full, unassailable legal ownership of every single algorithm she coded outside of her daily administrative duties." Elijah opened his mouth to intervene, raising his hands in a desperate, placating gesture. "Julian, we can resolve this internal misunderstanding. There is absolutely no need to make this a public spectacle. You made it a public spectacle the moment you tried to humiliate the true architect of your firm on this stage," Julian fired back, entirely stripping Elijah of his untouchable community patriarch status in one swift motion. Julian turned away from my father and faced the massive crowd. He adjusted his tailored jacket, projecting the absolute terrifying certainty of a man who controlled billions of dollars in liquid assets. "I do not invest in figureheads, and I do not invest in stolen glory. I invest in the minds that actually move the market," Julian announced to the silent, captive ballroom. "Therefore, I am officially withdrawing my entire acquisition portfolio from Vanguard Financial. Effective immediately, the Sterling Group's $3 billion merger is moving forward exclusively through Apex Vanguard." The impact of his words hit the room like a seismic shockwave. $3 billion. It was the largest single acquisition in the city's history, and Julian Sterling had just publicly handed it to me. I stood tall in my emerald gown, my expression perfectly serene. I did not gloat. I did not cheer. I simply nodded once to Julian, acknowledging the ultimate business partnership. The reaction from the elite crowd was instantaneous and devastating. The illusion of Vanguard Financial's absolute dominance shattered right in front of my father's eyes. The wealthy investors seated at the front VIP tables physically turned their bodies away from Elijah. I watched a prominent real estate mogul lean over and whisper frantically to his chief financial officer. Several venture capitalists immediately pulled out their cell phones, stepping away from their tables to make urgent hushed calls to their wealth managers. They were jumping ship. The sharks smelled blood in the water and they were all swimming furiously toward Apex Vanguard. Jada was left standing behind the podium looking like an absolute fool. The silver sequins of her expensive gown, intended to capture the spotlight and solidify her reign, now just highlighted her humiliating, inescapable defeat. She looked out at the city's elite, the powerful people, whose approval she had chased her entire life, and realized that they were actively turning their backs on her. She dropped the microphone. It hit the stage floor with a loud, ringing thud that made her flinch, but no one in the crowd even looked up at her. They were entirely focused on the new titan in the room. I did not wait for an apology. I did not wait for a dramatic, tearful family reconciliation. The corporate transaction was complete. I gracefully turned and walked down the side steps of the stage, my heels clicking softly against the polished wood. The crowd parted for me immediately, offering highly respectful nods and admiring glances as I navigated through the ballroom. I pushed through the heavy gilded doors and stepped out into the quiet, opulent hallway outside the main event space. The thick, luxurious carpet muted my footsteps as I walked toward the valet exit. The air was cool and smelled faintly of expensive floral arrangements. Kendra. The voice was a low, venomous snarl. I stopped and turned slowly. Elijah had followed me out of the ballroom. He marched down the hallway, completely abandoning the polished, charismatic persona he had flawlessly projected for the cameras. His velvet tuxedo jacket was unbuttoned, his silk tie slightly askew. The paternal warmth was entirely gone, replaced by the desperate, vicious rage of a man watching his empire burn to the ground in real time. He closed the distance between us, stopping just inches away from me. He tried to use his physical height to intimidate me, looming over me with his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle ticked furiously in his cheek. "You arrogant, ungrateful little girl!" Elijah spat, his voice trembling with sheer, unadulterated fury. "Do you have any idea what you have just done? You have single-handedly ruined a 30-year legacy. You have publicly humiliated your own sister. You just gutted the foundational core of Vanguard Financial." I looked up at him, my expression entirely unbothered. "I did not ruin anything, Dad. I just took back what was mine." "You destroyed this family!" Elijah yelled, stepping even closer, his fists balled tightly at his sides. "Without the sterling deal, the firm goes under. Do you hear me? We have leveraged everything we own on this acquisition. We will default on our corporate loans. We will be absolutely bankrupt by the end of the quarter. You are bankrupting your own father out of petty, childish spite." I tilted my head, studying the terrified, desperate man standing in front of me. I felt no pity. I felt absolutely no guilt. For 10 years he had treated me like a disposable, invisible asset. Now he was expecting me to care about his impending financial ruin. I offered him a cold, razor-sharp smile. "You are already bankrupt, Dad," I stated quietly, my voice ringing with absolute terrifying certainty. "Check your inbox." The fallout from the Grand Atrium Gala was absolute and instantaneous. By Monday morning, Apex Vanguard dominated the front page of every major financial publication in the country. Julian Sterling's public defection had triggered a catastrophic chain reaction, a mass exodus of Vanguard Financial's top-tier clientele. My newly leased glass-walled offices in the financial district buzzed with the relentless electric energy of a firm that had just conquered the market overnight. Phones rang constantly. Junior analysts rushed across the gleaming hardwood floors with pristine acquisition portfolios. We were untouchable. Across town, however, Vanguard Financial was bleeding out on the corporate floor. A dying animal is always the most dangerous, and Jada and Preston were backed into a suffocating corner. My father's firm was facing complete insolvency, without the Sterling merger, to float their over-leveraged debts. Worse still, Preston was entirely out of time. The 168-hour deadline I had given him to replace the $250,000 he had stolen from the client escrow accounts was expiring. He could not liquidate enough assets without tipping off the federal authorities, and Jada was watching her guaranteed inheritance crumble into worthless ash. They needed a miracle to salvage their lavish lifestyles. Instead of accepting defeat with dignity, they opted for federal crimes. Marcus was a 23-year-old statistical prodigy. He had applied for a junior analyst position at Vanguard Financial a year ago. Preston had personally thrown Marcus's resume in the trash, loudly declaring to the Human Resources Department that Marcus lacked the necessary pedigree because he had graduated from a public state university rather than an Ivy League institution. I had quietly retrieved that crumpled resume from the recycling bin. I recognized his raw, unpolished genius, and I mentored him in the shadows. When I launched Apex Vanguard, Marcus was my very first official hire. Jada and Preston did not know this. They only saw a young, inexperienced kid working at a brand new startup. They assumed he would be hungry for quick cash, easily intimidated by Vanguard's legacy, and foolish enough to betray his boss. I sat behind my sleek marble desk, reviewing the final transition documents for the Sterling merger. The heavy oak door to my office opened, and Marcus stepped inside. He looked entirely calm, though his dark eyes held a sharp, calculating gleam of deep satisfaction. He walked directly to my desk, reaching into the pocket of his sensible raincoat. He placed a small matte black flash drive precisely in the center of the pristine stone surface. Right next to it, he placed his smartphone. "They took the bait," Marcus said, taking a seat in the leather chair opposite me. I leaned back, steepling my fingers. "Tell me exactly how desperate they are." Marcus tapped his phone screen, hitting play on an audio file. The unmistakable, panicked voice of my brother-in-law filled my quiet office. The recording had been captured at a dimly lit, overpriced steakhouse on the edge of the city limits, a place where the Vanguard elite usually went when they did not want to be seen. "Let us not complicate this, Marcus." Preston's recorded voice sounded thin, frantic, and entirely stripped of his usual country club arrogance. I could hear the clinking of silverware and the nervous, rapid tapping of Preston's fingernails against a table. "Apex is a house of cards. Kendra is flying blind, making emotional decisions to hurt her family. You are a smart kid. You know a sinking ship when you see one. We are offering you a guaranteed senior position at Vanguard Financial, complete with a corner office and a signing bonus of $100,000 tax-free wired to an offshore account of your choosing by midnight tonight." Then Jada's voice cut in. It was sharp, venomous, and dripping with manic desperation. "All you have to do is take this drive," Jada instructed, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You walk into the Apex server room tomorrow morning before anyone else arrives. You plug it into the master terminal for exactly 3 minutes. The software will automatically clone Kendra's proprietary algorithms and wipe the localized backups. You walk out, and you are a wealthy man with a guaranteed corporate future. If you refuse, we will ensure you are blacklisted from every major financial institution on the Eastern Seaboard. You will never work in this city again." I listened to the recording without a single change in my expression. It was textbook extortion mixed with aggressive corporate espionage. They were terrified. Preston needed my algorithms to sell back to the market to cover his illegal escrow debts, and Jada desperately needed them to salvage whatever scraps remained of her shattered reputation as Vanguard's golden child. I looked up at Marcus. "And what did you say to them?" Marcus smiled, a cold, clinical expression he had undoubtedly learned from watching me operate over the last year. "I told them I needed the drive tonight so I could bypass the morning security protocols. They handed it over like absolute amateurs." He pointed to the black USB drive resting on my marble desk. "They really thought I would sell you out," Marcus added, shaking his head in sheer disbelief. "Preston threw my application in the garbage last year because I did not go to Yale. He told the receptionist I lacked the polish to even sit in Vanguard's lobby. You were the only person in this entire city who looked at my math instead of my background. You gave me a career. I would burn my own house down before I handed them a single line of your code. I felt a profound, settling sense of victory. My father had spent his entire life valuing optics over substance, pedigree over loyalty, and appearance over actual competence. He had raised Jada and Preston to do the exact same thing. Their fatal flaw was assuming the rest of the world operated with the same shallow, self-serving greed. They had vastly underestimated the absolute loyalty of someone who had been built from the ground up rather than handed an empire on a silver platter. I reached out and picked up the black flash drive. It felt incredibly light in my hand, yet it carried the undeniable destruction of my former oppressors. I plugged it into an isolated, heavily encrypted sandbox computer sitting on the credenza behind me. The screen immediately flagged a highly aggressive, invasive malware script designed to rip data and execute a hard wipe of the host drive. It was a digital assassination attempt. "You did perfectly, Marcus," I said, unplugging the drive and dropping it into the top drawer of my desk. "Take the rest of the week off with a 20% performance bonus applied to your next paycheck. I have some family business to attend to." Marcus nodded respectfully, gathered his phone, and left the office. I sat alone in the quiet, powerful hum of my new empire. The deadline I had given Preston to replace the stolen escrow funds expired in exactly 3 hours. Now added to the felony wire fraud, I had irrefutable, legally recorded proof of Jada and Preston attempting to commit severe corporate espionage, bribery, and grand larceny. They had handed me the final nails for their own corporate coffins on a silver platter. I did not dial the police. I did not call the Federal Bureau of Investigation. That would have been too quick, too sterile, and far too easy for them. They needed to look me in the eye when the final blow was delivered. They needed to understand exactly who was dismantling their lives brick by brick. I opened my laptop and drafted a single concise email. I addressed it directly to Elijah, Jada, and Preston. I did not use corporate letterhead, and I certainly did not bother with familial pleasantries. I attached a crystal-clear 10-second audio snippet of Preston offering the $100,000 bribe, followed immediately by a high-resolution screenshot of the shadow audit proving his $250,000 escrow theft. The meeting location I selected was deliberate. I chose the downtown law offices of Sterling and Hayes, Julian Sterling's personal, high-powered legal team. It was an absolutely terrifying neutral ground where Elijah Vanguard had zero influence, zero community leverage, and zero control. It was a fortress of untouchable wealth where my family could not hide behind their carefully curated public image. The message body contained only 2 sentences. "We are meeting at the law offices of Sterling and Hayes at noon today. It is time to negotiate a surrender." The conference room at Sterling and Hayes was a masterclass in corporate intimidation. Located on the 64th floor of a sleek glass skyscraper, the room featured floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a dizzying, unobstructed view of the financial district below. The massive table was carved from a single slab of polished black walnut. The air conditioning hummed at a perfectly calibrated, frigid temperature. It was a room designed to make people feel small, a fortress built entirely on ruthless litigation and billions of dollars in billable hours. I sat at the far end of the long table, a solitary figure flanked by empty leather chairs. I had dressed meticulously for the occasion, wearing a sharp-tailored charcoal suit that projected nothing but cold, absolute authority. My hands rested flat on the polished wood. I waited. Exactly at noon, the heavy double doors swung open. Elijah, Jada, and Preston walked into the boardroom. The transformation in their demeanor was absolutely staggering. Just days ago, my father had been raging in a hallway, Jada had been publicly humiliated on a gala stage, and Preston had been hyperventilating in a coffee shop booth facing federal prison. Today they walked through the doors as a united, victorious front. Preston strode in first. He had seemingly recovered every single ounce of his country club arrogance. He wore a crisp navy suit, his posture perfectly straight, his chin lifted in a blatant display of unearned superiority. Jada walked closely beside him, practically vibrating with smug satisfaction. She wore a bright crimson power dress, visually attempting to dominate the neutral space. Elijah brought up the rear, walking with the slow, measured pace of a monarch arriving to accept tribute from a defeated territory. They clearly believed they had won. When they received my email requesting a negotiation of surrender, they had interpreted it exactly as I intended them to. They assumed Marcus had successfully executed their backdoor operation. They believed the black flash drive had done its job, that my private servers were wiped clean, and that my proprietary algorithms were now sitting securely in Vanguard Financial's possession. They thought Apex Vanguard was dead before it even took its first breath. Elijah pulled out the heavy leather chair at the head of the table, sitting directly opposite me. Jada and Preston took their seats on his right and left, flanking him like loyal lieutenants. Preston did not even bother with a greeting. He reached into his suit jacket, pulled out the matte black flash drive, and tossed it casually across the smooth walnut surface. The small piece of plastic slid to a halt just inches from my folded hands. The sharp clatter echoed loudly in the quiet boardroom. "There is your surrender, Kendra," Preston announced, his voice dripping with condescension. A brilliant attempt at a coup, but ultimately a complete failure. Your entire company was built on a single digital foundation, and we just pulled the rug out from under it. Your private servers are empty. Your localized backups are wiped. Everything you spent the last 10 years building is currently sitting on our secure mainframes. I looked down at the flash drive, maintaining a perfectly neutral expression. I did not touch it. Jada leaned forward, placing her manicured hands flat on the table, eager to deliver the final killing blow. "You really thought you could outsmart us?" Jada sneered, her eyes gleaming with malicious triumph. "You thought you could publicly embarrass me in front of the entire city and just walk away with a $3 billion client? You forgot who you were dealing with. We are Vanguard. We do not lose to rogue administrative assistants." She opened a sleek leather portfolio and slid a thick stack of printed documents across the table toward me. "These are the terms of your surrender." Jada dictated, her tone sharp and uncompromising. "First, you will immediately dissolve the Apex Vanguard LLC entity. Second, you will release a public statement to the financial press this afternoon. You will state that your dramatic announcement at the gala was a planned theatrical stunt, and that Apex Vanguard was simply a temporary subsidiary that is now officially merging back under the Vanguard financial umbrella. Third, you will issue a formal written apology to Julian Sterling for misleading him, and you will personally assure him that I will be the lead executive managing his acquisition portfolio moving forward." Elijah leaned back in his chair, adjusting his silver cufflinks. He did not look angry anymore. He looked like a proud patriarch watching his designated heirs ruthlessly protect his empire. "You brought this entirely on yourself, Kendra," Elijah stated, his voice adopting that familiar, patronizing warmth. "You let your ego cloud your judgment. You tried to wage a war without understanding the weapons we have at our disposal." Jada and Preston took the necessary initiative to protect the family legacy. They recognized a threat and they neutralized it. "I am disappointed that it had to come to this, but you left us no choice. Sign the document, shut down this ridiculous fantasy, and we can quietly sweep this entire embarrassment under the rug." I sat in absolute silence, letting their arrogant demands hang in the freezing air of the boardroom. I looked at Preston, who was practically beaming. I looked at Jada, who was practically vibrating with toxic victory. I looked at my father, who was perfectly content to watch his other children execute a corporate assassination against me. And then I laughed. It was not a chuckle. It was a sharp, genuine sound of pure, unadulterated amusement that echoed loudly off the glass walls. I covered my mouth with my hand, shaking my head as the sheer, pathetic absurdity of their confidence washed over me. The victorious smiles on their faces instantly faltered. Confusion rippled across the table. This was not the reaction of a defeated woman. This was not the tearful submission they had walked in expecting to receive. "What exactly is so funny to you?" Jada demanded, her voice rising an octave, the polished veneer cracking just a fraction. "You have absolutely nothing left. Sign the paperwork." I lowered my hand and picked up a sleek silver remote control resting beside my legal notepad. "You are right about one thing, Dad," I said, looking directly into Elijah's eyes. "I did bring you here to negotiate a surrender. I just never said it was going to be mine." I pressed the silver button. A quiet motorized hum vibrated through the ceiling. A massive high-definition monitor slowly descended from the recessed paneling above the far wall. The screen flickered to life, displaying a stark black background with a simple audio waveform, graphic pulsating in the center. I tapped the remote a second time. The audio file began to play through the boardroom's state-of-the-art surround sound speakers. The acoustics in the room were flawless. Every single syllable was crystal clear. "Let us not complicate this, Marcus." Preston's recorded voice instantly filled the room. The sound of clinking steakhouse silverware and ice clinking in glasses provided a vivid background track. Apex is a house of cards. Kendra is flying blind, making emotional decisions to hurt her family. You are a smart kid. You know a sinking ship when you see one. We are offering you a guaranteed senior position at Vanguard Financial, complete with a corner office and a signing bonus of $100,000 tax-free wired to an offshore account of your choosing by midnight tonight. Preston went entirely rigid in his chair. The blood vanished from his face so fast he looked physically ill. He stared at the monitor, his eyes wide with rising absolute terror. Then Jada's recorded voice echoed off the glass walls, sharp, venomous, and undeniable. "All you have to do is take this drive. You walk into the Apex server room tomorrow morning before anyone else arrives. You plug it into the master terminal for exactly 3 minutes. The software will automatically clone Kendra's proprietary algorithms and wipe the localized backups. You walk out, and you are a wealthy man with a guaranteed corporate future. If you refuse, we will ensure you are blacklisted from every major financial institution on the Eastern Seaboard. You will never work in this city again." I hit the pause button on the remote. The sudden silence in the boardroom was absolutely deafening. I looked across the table. The transformation was complete. The arrogant, victorious executives had completely evaporated. Preston looked like a man who had just been sentenced to the electric chair. His breathing was shallow and erratic. Jada had shrunk back into her heavy leather chair, her jaw hanging slack, her hands trembling violently on top of the table. They realized exactly what they had done. They had just walked into the private fortress of Julian Sterling's elite legal team and proudly claimed responsibility for an operation that I had just proven was a felony-level conspiracy. Elijah Vanguard sat completely paralyzed. The patriarch of the Vanguard Empire was processing the disaster unfolding in real time. He did not care about the morality of the act. He cared about the catastrophic legal exposure. His golden child and his lead corporate counsel had just been caught on tape, committing textbook corporate espionage, attempting to execute a hostile cyber attack, and bribing an employee. Elijah violently pushed his chair back and stood up. He turned on Preston, his face contorted in absolute unfiltered rage. "Are you completely out of your mind?" Elijah roared, the sound vibrating the glass walls. "You attempted to bribe a startup analyst and hack a private server. You left a digital trail. You left an audio recording. You have exposed this entire firm to a massive, crippling federal lawsuit." Preston opened his mouth, stammering incoherently, raising his hands in a pathetic attempt to defend himself. "Elijah, please, we had to do something. We needed those algorithms. Jada said we could flip the kid. Do not try to pin your sheer incompetence on my daughter." Elijah shouted, slamming his hand onto the walnut table. "You are the corporate counsel. You are supposed to protect this firm from liability, not hand them a recorded confession of federal crimes." I sat back in my chair, watching my father tear his favorite son-in-law to shreds. I let him scream. I let the panic completely saturate the room. I let them feel the absolute terror of the trap snapping shut around their ankles. Then I raised my right hand. The simple, quiet gesture instantly silenced the room. Elijah stopped shouting, turning to look at me, his chest heaving. Preston and Jada stared at me with wide, terrified eyes. I held total, absolute command of the room. "Oh, Dad," I said smoothly, my voice calm, pleasant, and utterly devoid of mercy. "You really should not be yelling at Preston for trying to steal my software." I reached for the thick red folder resting next to my notepad. "Corporate espionage is the absolute least of Preston's crimes," I stated, sliding the folder deliberately across the polished wood until it came to rest directly in front of my father. "Let us talk about your money." Elijah stared at the thick crimson folder resting on the polished walnut table. He did not immediately reach for it. He looked at it as if it were a live explosive, his chest rising and falling with heavy labored breaths. The sheer confidence in my voice had entirely shattered his remaining bravado. Slowly, with a trembling hand, he reached out and flipped open the heavy cardstock cover. The first page bore the embossed seal of a highly aggressive, internationally recognized forensic accounting firm. For 10 years, I had quietly managed the raw ledgers of Vanguard Financial. I had operated in the background, auditing the accounts, balancing the quarterly reports, and correcting the catastrophic mathematical errors made by the senior executives. I knew exactly how the money flowed through that firm. I knew every hidden offshore account, every buried corporate expense, and every single discrepancy. When I left the building after the gala, I did not just walk away with my proprietary algorithms. I walked away with a complete unredacted digital copy of Vanguard's financial history. I had handed it directly to Julian Sterling's team of forensic auditors, and they had spent the last 48 hours tearing it apart. Elijah scanned the executive summary on the first page. The color rapidly drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. His eyes darted frantically across the columns of numbers, his pupils dilating in absolute horror. $4.2 million, Elijah whispered, his voice cracking entirely. He looked up, his gaze snapping to Preston. You stole $4.2 million from our operational capital. Preston went completely rigid. He gripped the armrests of his leather chair so tightly his knuckles turned bone white. This is fabricated, Preston stammered, his voice jumping an octave as pure panic flooded his system. She hacked the network. She planted these numbers to frame me. Elijah, you cannot possibly believe her over me. I am your lead counsel. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the cool marble of the boardroom table. Do not insult my intelligence, Preston. I stated, my tone sharp and unforgiving. You did not just steal $250,000 from the client escrow account last week. That was just a sloppy, desperate grab to cover an immediate margin call. You have been systematically bleeding Vanguard's operational funds dry for 36 consecutive months. You routed the money through a complex web of dummy limited liability companies disguised as third-party vendor payments, and you funneled every single cent into offshore casinos and illegal sports betting syndicates to cover your massive underground gambling debts. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. The meticulously constructed facade of the perfect Ivy League executive had completely evaporated. Preston looked like a trapped rat facing a predator. He opened his mouth to issue another denial, but no words came out. The paper trail was flawless, tracing every stolen dollar directly to the IP addresses registered at his luxury country club condominium. Jada suddenly gasped, throwing a hand over her mouth in a display of theatrical, exaggerated horror. She turned in her chair, glaring at her husband with wide, betrayed eyes. Preston, how could you? Jada cried out, her voice trembling with manufactured grief. You stole from my father. You bankrupted our family firm to cover your disgusting gambling habits. I had absolutely no idea. Dad, I swear to you, I knew nothing about this. She reached across the table, desperately trying to grab Elijah's hand to solidify her position as the innocent, victimized wife. Turn to page 47, Dad. I interrupted smoothly, entirely ignoring Jada's pathetic performance. Elijah withdrew his hand from Jada's reach. He flipped heavily through the bound audit, the crisp pages turning loudly in the quiet room. He stopped at the specified tab. He stared at the itemized lists, the bank routing numbers, and the dates of the transfers. His breathing grew shallow. Jada froze. The dramatic tears instantly dried in her eyes as a look of sheer, unadulterated terror washed over her perfectly contoured face. The audit clearly shows that the stolen funds were not solely utilized for Preston's gambling debts, I explained, looking directly into my sister's panicked eyes. Preston was stealing double what he owed the bookies. The secondary transfers were routed directly into a private offshore account, registered exclusively under your maiden name, Jada. Jada's mouth opened and closed like a suffocating fish. She looked frantically from me to Elijah, her polished demeanor violently cracking. You knew exactly what Preston was doing. I continued, my voice echoing off the glass walls. You discovered his embezzlement 2 years ago, but instead of reporting him to the board or telling our father you demanded a cut of the stolen money to keep your mouth shut, you used those funds to maintain the opulent, wealthy lifestyle you flaunted on social media. I gestured to the open folder in front of Elijah. Look at the expenditures, Dad, I instructed. $400,000 spent on private jet rentals for her luxury vacations to Milan and Paris. $200,000 dropped on custom designer wardrobes and high-end jewelry. Another $300,000 to secure the mortgage on her coastal summer house. She was actively helping Preston bankrupt your firm to fund a pathetic mirage. They were bleeding you dry so she could pretend to be a titan of industry on the internet. Elijah looked at his golden child, the daughter he had elevated, celebrated, and chosen to inherit his legacy over me. His expression was a devastating mixture of profound heartbreak and absolute disgust. He had overlooked all of my hard work, my loyalty, and my genius to hand his empire to two people who were secretly destroying it from the inside out. Preston suddenly bolted out of his chair. The instinct for self-preservation completely overrode any remaining shred of marital loyalty. He pointed a shaking finger directly at Jada's face. She made me do it, Preston shouted, his voice echoing hysterically across the boardroom. She told me my salary was not enough. She threatened to leave me and take half of my assets if I did not provide the lifestyle she believed she was entitled to. She found out about a minor gambling debt I had, and she used it to blackmail me into siphoning the operational accounts. She was the architect behind the dummy corporations. She forced my hand. Jada leaped to her feet, her chair violently crashing backward onto the thick carpet. "You lying, cowardly piece of garbage!" Jada screamed, her face flushed dark red with absolute fury. "You were in over your head with the syndicates. They were going to break your legs. I covered for you. I protected your pathetic reputation, and you dare try to pin federal wire fraud on me?" A vicious, humiliating screaming match erupted in the center of the pristine boardroom. The golden couple, the untouchable heirs to the Vanguard throne, were violently tearing each other to shreds to avoid a federal indictment. They hurled accusations, screamed obscenities, and pointed fingers, completely abandoning the sophisticated corporate masks they had worn their entire adult lives. They looked entirely pathetic. I sat back in my chair, folding my hands in my lap, and watched them self-destruct. Elijah squeezed his eyes shut. He raised his hands, pressing the heels of his palms against his temples, as if trying to physically block out the sound of his children destroying his life's work. His shoulders sagged heavily. The proud, untouchable patriarch was completely broken. "Quiet," Elijah commanded. His voice was not a roar. It was a raspy, defeated whisper, but it carried enough weight to instantly silence the screaming couple. Jada and Preston stopped arguing, turning to look at him with wide, fearful eyes. Elijah did not look at them. He slowly raised his head and looked across the long walnut table directly at me. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with deep dark shadows of absolute exhaustion. The realization had fully settled into his bones. His legacy was completely gone. His money was stolen. His firm was entirely hollowed out, nothing more than an empty shell waiting to collapse under the weight of its own leveraged debt. He knew that Julian Sterling had just finalized my independent contract. He knew that Apex Vanguard had launched with a massive multi-million-dollar cash advance from the Sterling Group to facilitate the new merger. Kendra Elijah began, his voice trembling with a pathetic, desperate pleading that I had never heard from him before. He leaned forward, gripping the edges of the table. "The Internal Revenue Service is going to audit Vanguard Financial the moment the Sterling deal officially falls through. They are going to find these missing millions. They will seize my personal assets. They will take my home. They will take everything I have ever worked for." He swallowed hard, tears pooling in his eyes. "I know Julian gave you a massive advance," Elijah begged, completely abandoning his pride. "You are family. You are my daughter. Please. You have the capital. You can cover the deficit. You can replace the stolen funds before the federal authorities freeze the accounts. You have to save the family business." I looked at the broken man sitting across from me. I thought about the decade I spent in the shadows auditing his ledgers, building his algorithms, and saving his firm from ruin, only to be tossed aside and called a failure. I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my charcoal jacket. I picked up my silver remote and my legal notepad. "I cannot save your company, Dad," I stated softly, "because I just bought it." The words hung in the freezing, climate-controlled air of the boardroom, heavy and absolute. I reached into my leather briefcase and withdrew a second, much thinner folder. I placed it directly on top of the massive forensic audit in front of my father. Elijah stared at the manila envelope as if it were a venomous snake. He did not move. He did not breathe. When Julian Sterling officially transferred his $3 billion portfolio to Apex Vanguard yesterday morning, he did not just bring me the largest single account in the city. I explained, my voice echoing crisply against the glass walls. He also brought an 8-figure capital advance to facilitate the immediate expansion of my firm. I did not use that capital to lease office space or hire new executives, Dad. I used it to systematically approach every single one of Vanguard Financial's major creditors. The color vanished entirely from Elijah's face. He understood exactly what I was saying before I even finished the sentence. "Your firm has been bleeding cash for 3 years, kept alive solely by highly leveraged, aggressive commercial loans." I continued, leaning forward slightly. "Your creditors were already terrified by the market rumors of Sterling's defection. When I offered to buy your outstanding corporate debt at 90 cents on the dollar, they practically fought each other to sign the transfer papers. They wanted out of a sinking ship. So as of 9 o'clock this morning, Apex Vanguard is the sole majority debt holder of Vanguard Financial. I own your promissory notes. I own your leveraged margins. I own the absolute right to call in your debts immediately." I tapped the thin folder with my index finger. "I cannot save your company, Dad, because Vanguard Financial legally belongs to me." The boardroom descended into a suffocating, deathly silence. The realization of their total, inescapable defeat crashed down upon them with the weight of a collapsing skyscraper. Preston began to hyperventilate. His chest heaved erratically under his expensive navy suit. He looked wildly around the room, his eyes darting toward the heavy mahogany doors as if calculating the distance for a physical escape. I turned my gaze squarely onto him, pinning him to his leather chair, with a look of absolute zero mercy. "Do not bother calculating a defense strategy, Preston," I stated, my tone slicing through the quiet room like a freshly sharpened blade. "You do not have to worry about replacing the $250,000 you stole from the client escrow accounts. That is entirely irrelevant now. At exactly 8:30 this morning, my legal team forwarded the complete unredacted embezzlement audit to the State Bar Association. They have every dummy corporation, every falsified invoice, and every wire transfer you executed to pay off your underground gambling syndicate." Preston let out a pathetic, strangled gasp. He gripped his own hair, his polished veneer shattering into a million irreparable pieces. "And 10 minutes after that," I added smoothly, "the exact same encrypted file was hand-delivered to the white-collar crime division of the federal authorities. You are facing immediate permanent disbarment, Preston. But more importantly, you are facing 20 years in federal prison for wire fraud, corporate espionage, and grand larceny." Jada let out a piercing, hysterical scream. She violently shoved her chair back and lunged at her husband. She began striking Preston's shoulders with her manicured hands, her face twisted in a mask of pure, unfiltered panic. The realization that her pristine, wealthy social media image had been funded by stolen money had completely broken her psyche. "You idiot!" Jada shrieked, her voice cracking as tears of absolute terror streamed down her face. "You dragged me into a federal crime. My clothes, the summer house. My entire life is a crime scene. I am going to jail because you could not stop betting on sports. Tell them I did not know. Tell them I had nothing to do with it." Preston viciously shoved her hands away, his own face contorted with cowardice and desperation. He instantly turned on the woman he had sworn to protect, perfectly showcasing the spineless nature I had always known he possessed. "You knew everything!" Preston screamed right back at her, his voice cracking hysterically. "You demanded that money. You told me to keep siphoning the accounts to pay for your luxury trips to Paris. I am not going down for this alone, Jada. I am giving the feds everything. I am giving them your text messages, your bank receipts, all of it. They tore into each other like feral animals, hurling vicious accusations and screaming threats of federal cooperation across the polished walnut table. The golden couple of the Vanguard Empire was destroying whatever was left of their marriage in a desperate, pathetic race to save themselves from a prison cell. I ignored them entirely. I looked back at Elijah. The patriarch of the Vanguard family was broken. He sat slumped in his heavy leather chair, staring at the forensic audit with hollow, dead eyes. The man who had commanded boardrooms, intimidated politicians, and ruled our family with an iron fist had been completely hollowed out. He looked up at me. His eyes were red, swimming with tears of absolute humiliation. "Kendra, please," Elijah begged. His voice was a weak, trembling whisper. He reached his shaking hands across the table, pleading with the daughter he had spent a decade trying to erase. "Please, the community, my legacy. I cannot end my career like this. I cannot be publicly bankrupted and investigated by the Internal Revenue Service." He swallowed hard, completely abandoning his pride. "Take the company," Elijah pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. "Take the assets. But let me keep my title. Let me stay on as the chief executive officer just in name, just for the optics. Let me act as a figurehead for the transition. I will do whatever you say. I will sign whatever you want. Just do not let the financial press see me stripped of everything. Please, Kendra, I am your father." I looked at the desperate, terrified man begging for his pride. For 10 years I had craved his validation. I had worked myself to the bone, hoping that one day he would look at me with the respect he so freely handed to Jada and Preston. Now, holding his entire life in the palm of my hand, I felt absolutely nothing. "There is no transition, Dad," I replied, my voice as cold and hard as the marble floor beneath us. "You are being forcibly retired. Today. At 5 o'clock this evening, Vanguard Financial ceases to exist. I am liquidating your old corporate assets to cover the debt you owe me, and I am unilaterally absorbing your remaining profitable divisions into my own empire. Your legacy is over." Elijah let out a quiet, devastated sob, burying his face in his trembling hands. I calmly reached forward and picked up my silver remote control, slipping it into my tailored jacket pocket. I gathered my legal notepad, closed my briefcase, and stood up from the table. My posture was perfectly straight. My composure was absolute. I turned and walked away. I did not look back at the wreckage. I left Jada, sobbing hysterically on the floor, screaming threats of divorce at Preston, while Preston sat paralyzed with the terrifying reality of his impending arrest. I left Elijah weeping silently into his hands, drowning in the catastrophic consequences of his own blind toxic favoritism. I pushed open the heavy mahogany doors and stepped out into the pristine, silent hallway of the law firm. The thick glass completely muted the chaotic sounds of their destruction. I walked smoothly down the corridor and pressed the button for the private elevator. The brushed steel doors slid open instantly. I stepped inside the quiet mirrored cab, the doors closing silently to seal me away from my past forever. As the elevator began its rapid descent to the lobby, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out. The screen illuminated with a secure text message from Julian Sterling. "The press release just went live. The markets are reacting flawlessly to the acquisition. Congratulations, CEO. We launch the new fund tomorrow morning." I stared at the glowing text, a genuine, powerful smile finally breaking across my face. I typed a single decisive reply. "See you at the top, Julian." I lowered my phone and looked at my reflection in the polished steel doors of the elevator. The woman staring back at me was no longer a shadow. She was no longer an invisible asset waiting for permission to exist. For 10 years, I let my family tell me exactly who I was. I wore the muted beige blazers. I sat in the windowless back offices. I audited their catastrophic mistakes, fixed their massive financial blunders, and allowed them to parade around in the spotlight while I quietly kept their empire from crumbling into dust. They demanded my absolute loyalty, but they only ever rewarded submission. They looked at my quiet, relentless dedication and mistook it for weakness. The ultimate lesson from Kendra's journey is that your true worth is never defined by those who constantly belittle you. Toxic family members and manipulative colleagues will often mistake your quiet dedication for weakness, using your loyalty to build their own empires. However, true power lies in silent preparation, unshakable self-belief, and absolute financial independence. When people try to keep you in the shadows, do not wait for their validation or beg for a seat at their table. Instead, focus on building your own strength. Ultimately, the best revenge is outgrowing the very people who tried to destroy you. Share your own story of overcoming toxic family dynamics in the comments below, and hit that subscribe button for more empowering tales of sweet revenge.